I figured AI was a really good one to start with because we all have different opinions about it. And this gives us a chance to practice some of these rules of engagement, which pretty much are things like we're going to listen with curiosity. We're going to assume people came to their conclusions thoughtfully. So we're going to give them that benefit of thank you for thinking through this thoughtfully. And we're here to have a conversation, not come to conclusions, nor are we making policy for the church. This is a conversation. So the goal is to actually have other people speak into our own perspectives, again, with the idea that everyone has different expertise, different experiences than we have. And so they can speak from their perspective into this topic. So that's part of the goal. So we're stoking curiosity. We're not coming to judgment. We're not making policy. And also, we're in a church building. So part of what we are also doing is just thinking through how do we, as people who in general hold this Christian missional view of life and existing in the world and helping to bring about the kingdom of God here, how does AI fit into that? Like maybe it's different when we put that missional idea over the top of it. So those are some of the things. The layout for the day is Joel is going to present first, and then Chris Messick, and then Corey Stamper. And these are going to be like really big ideas, like philosophical idea of intellect, that kind of, what is the history of AI? And we've been, Stephen, because of the comment you made to me about let's be specific about our terms, I've started using that in all my conversations about AI recently. So AI's been in existence for a really long time. And so what kind of AI are we talking about? So that's our first conversation. And then we're going to do a miniature, really short panel discussion with the first three people who are presenting. And then we're going to have a stand-up stretch, refill coffee break. And then we're going to come back. And then we're going to have May, Jason, and Ben, who are going to be presenting at the end. Okay, is that good? And just so you know, we are filming this just so that we have an archive of this conversation. And because several people can't be here, we are going to do a part 2 of this conversation. Because people like Alex Arnold, he does public theology, is finishing up this huge study on AI in the church in particular. So we will do a part 2 later on when we can hear some of his results, when we can talk about AI in therapy, AI in the medical world. Okay, yes? We do care. We do care. Let's say if you're asking like a real quick question, the person can just repeat it into the microphone. And then when we have the panel discussion, we'll run around with the mic. Yeah, thanks. Okay, great. Well, then I would love to invite Joel. I just saw him and then, right in front of me. Oh. Well, no, because I already did. Oh, here we go. Here we go. These are our shared agreements. We listen deeply, exercise curiosity. We share and ask questions with respect. We're not fixing or solving. This is the whole, we're not making policy. And we're going to suspend judgment, assuming, again, that most people in the room have different ideas of what's okay about AI. And we still love everyone, right? Like you're not less of a Christian or less of a human. So we're not doing that. That feels ugly. We're not doing that. I think everything else is good. Okay. Yeah.
Hi. I teach philosophy, and so I'm a university professor. So I deal with AI with students, but I'm a philosopher, so this is going to be very kind of conceptual. I'm going to talk a little bit about like what do we mean by intelligence, and then talk a little bit about some of the ethical issues that AI raises, not really giving any resolution to those, just kind of laying out the territory a little bit, and probably not in as nice of a order as I would have liked, but there's too much to say, and I don't even know how to organize it all. So, one thing I want to say is, as long as human beings have been making technology, they've been thinking about AI. So here's a quote from Aristotle, a little while ago, right? We're 2,300 some years ago. He says in his book, Politics, can I just hold on to this? There we go. If each instrument could do its own work at the word of a command or by intelligent anticipation, if that's how you want to translate that, like the statues of Daedalus or the tripods of Hephaestus, you know these things. Daedalus created statues that like moved on their own, and Hephaestus, who's like equivalent of Vulcan for the Romans, he's like metallurgy and fire, created things that like brought dinner and stuff to the gods, kind of like the house in Beauty and the Beast with all the moving, yeah. Anyway, managers would not need subordinates and masters would not need slaves. So, one, people are thinking about this kind of thing thousands of years ago. Two, they want to turn them into slaves. So, whoop, wrong direction. Jumping ahead. So René Descartes, Enlightenment philosopher, he's writing in the 1600s. In his book Discourse on Method in 1637, again, he's imagining what we would maybe think of as AI. He says, if there were machines bearing the image of our bodies and capable of imitating our actions so far as that's morally possible, there would still remain two most certain tests whereby to know that they were not therefore really men. And the question is, are his tests, do they still work, right? The first test is that they can never use words or other signs arranged in such a manner as is competent to us in order to declare our thoughts to others. LLMs, large language models, seem to maybe make that questionable. Second test is, although such machines might execute many things with even better than us, they would not be doing so from knowledge, but solely from the disposition of their organs, how they're programmed. Yeah, maybe that's still something to say. Even the first one, there might be a way of saving it, but we can come back to that later. Since that time, there have been a lot of people thinking in the worlds of fiction. It's a little hard to see that. The Samuel Butler book, 1872, does anyone know this book, what it is? It's a book called Erewhon. The store is named after it, which is kind of weird because why is it that people like want to name things like Palantir and Panopto and I don't know. Anyway, Erewhon's a book about a future society where people are punished for not being healthy, but they can get away with what we would think of as crimes. Moral failings are not treated harshly, they're like treated medically, whereas medical failings, and even actually being ugly or not being as pretty as you can be, are punished severely by the law and treated like crimes. And so they named the store after that. But the first part of the book is about prehistory to the Erewhon stuff. The word Erewhon is the word nowhere rearranged. It's a utopia story. But the way you get to the utopia is there's an age of machines where artificial intelligence is created and the humans end up having to destroy it because it's taking over everything and threatening the human survival. And so there's a jihad against the robots. So that's sometimes referred to as Butlerian jihad, which is then picked up with the Dune series and other sorts of things. I'll just go through these. Metropolis, there's a machine and then iRobot with Asimov. HAL, you all know HAL from 2001, yeah. So as soon as people are thinking about these things and imagining them, they're trying to think about rules for them. So Asimov is coming up with laws for robotics. And then there's all the kinds of ways these things can go horribly wrong. People start worrying about. Okay, let's get into the idea of AI. So 2 articles. One is by Sir Jeffrey Jefferson, 1949 in the British Medical Journal, of all things, called The Mind of Mechanical Man. And he's basically imagining what we would think of now as a large language model. He's thinking about something that, if you read his description, it's basically ChatGPT. He doesn't know how to make it, but he imagines this is happening and happening soon. He denies that it would, however, be in any meaningful sense intelligent, right? Because the outputs would not be the result of thinking, and thinking requires a higher order awareness. So he's on the side of like, AI is an I, right? It's not intelligence. But then you have Alan Turing, right? People have heard of Turing? Yeah. So he has an article a year later in 1950 called Computing Machinery and Intelligence, and he suggests that, well, maybe we're asking the wrong question. Jefferson's asking the wrong question. The question shouldn't be, can machines think, but can machines do what we as thinking entities can do? And if they can, isn't that intelligence enough? Then, in 1955, there was a proposal for a Dartmouth summer research project on artificial intelligence. And this is where the word artificial intelligence, the phrase, really sort of enters the conversation. 1955. McCarthy, Minsky, Rochester, and Shannon, who are in that picture, but I don't know which one's which. They have two things that they talk about in their proposal for their research project. The first is every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can in principle be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. So they're thinking of AI in terms of simulation of what it is that human beings do. And then they add further down, the artificial intelligence problem is taken to be that of making a machine behave in ways that would be called intelligent if a human were so behaving. So he's not saying, or they're not saying that machines can be intelligent, but it's enough to call it artificial intelligence if it's doing the sort of things that intelligent beings do. So there's like this imitation idea. All right, so what is intelligence? And to what degree do our machines do this? So there's different ways of thinking about this, and this is not an exhaustive, nothing I say is exhaustive. So first of all, behavior. And this goes back to some of the things we just saw. Acting in ways that would be recognized as intelligent behavior if a human were doing it. So if a machine's doing it, maybe it's also intelligent. Agency, perceives environment and acts to achieve goals. That's one way of defining agency. And then you have to ask, like, what's perceive mean? If my dishwasher is perceiving that there's a high amount of particulate matter in the water, and so it like ups filtration and water flow, is that agency? Yeah, it's a dishwasher. So, you know, is that really perceiving, or is that just detecting in a non-perceptive way? These words are slippery. Autonomy, acts on its own without human intervention, can learn and improve. Well, large language models maybe do that, right? Depending on what you mean by act, right? Are they really acting in the sense that we act as an expression of intention and will? No. And then consciousness and sentience. This is really sort of the point where we're like, okay, we don't build anything that does this yet. At least I don't think so. We can dispute this. Has subjective experiences, feelings, sensations, qualia, which is sort of the interior character of experiencing something like the warmth of a day or the cadence of the song or whatever. And then awareness, attention, sense of self. And then the question would be, to what degree does the stuff in number 4 have to suffuse and qualify 1, 2, and 3 for those things to really actually be intelligence? So those are some questions. Here's another set of questions. Are AI outputs meaningful? When you put something in ChatGPT and it produces an answer, is it meaningful? One position is it doesn't mean anything. We make it mean something. Computers can't do meaning. Right? So what are conditions for meaningfulness? Again, this is some philosophers would say. One is externalism. Expressive subjects have to appropriately interact with the things out in the world for linguistic acts to be meaningful, to meaningfully refer to reality. Do large language models appropriately interact with the things in the world? Are they more self-enclosed systems? The only access they have to the world is through all the text that they've been fed, right? Internalism. Expressive subjects must have the right kind of communicative intentions. Does ChatGPT have intentions? And then 3, conventionalism. So language is a conventional system of signs by which we communicate, one definition. Expressive subjects have to have the capacity to understand and follow social conventions, to use language in a competent and meaningful way. So think about like playing soccer. Thinking about this a lot lately. It has rules, right? And part of what it means to play soccer is to engage in the set of conventions and rules by which the game is played. If there's a machine that's doing all the things that fit the rules, but it doesn't know their rules and it's not following them, is it really doing something meaningful? So you could argue that the outputs of ChatGPT are, strictly speaking, meaningless until we as human beings take them up and do something with them and impute meaning to them. This is one position. Okay, ethical issues. There are 3 types of ethical issues that I think arise, or at least one way of categorizing them. And these are not hermetically sealed off from each other. First, there's common issues. There are some ethical issues that are raised by AI, which are just the same old ethical issues we're dealing with all the time. Just they're rising over here now. So like, I'm trying to think of an example. Maybe questions about sort of like just distribution of technology to people. Do all people have equal access? We're dealing with those sorts of issues all the time about everything, healthcare, education, et cetera. It's just same issue, different technology, right? Then there's issues that are general ethical issues that we're dealing with all the time that AI may intensify or exacerbate in a unique way, is a second category. So, and maybe Jason can speak to this, but like some of the questions about like use of the power grid and the amount of energy we need in order to sustain data centers and that kind of stuff. Yeah, this is an issue we're dealing with all the time with all kinds of different things, right, that take up energy. So it's not really a uniquely AI issue, but maybe AI is intensifying and exacerbating an existing issue in a new way. And then there's things that may be just unique, raised by AI, that are entirely unique to the existence of AI technology and only arise because of it, and we're going to talk about some of those briefly. So this is the first case of a self-driving vehicle killing someone. It was in Tempe, Arizona. Who's responsible? Now, in this particular case, there was a driver in the car who was supposed to be paying attention and make sure the thing didn't do that. But there was a woman walking across the street with her bicycle in the dark, and the car couldn't figure out what it was. It didn't know if it was a sign. It didn't know if it was just a bicycle. It didn't know if it was some sort of unidentified object. Whatever it was doing, it didn't identify it as human, her as human, and mowed her down. Right? So then this question is like, well, who's responsible? This seems like a uniquely AI sort of thing, right? These questions about responsibility. And often when it comes to praise and blame are asymmetrical. Talk about this in a minute. But if you do something and get ChatGPT to produce a great result, we're probably not going to praise you a whole lot for it because the LLM did most of the work. You wrote a great prompt. Yay, you. But if you use ChatGPT to learn how to build a anthrax bomb or something, right, then we are probably going to assign blame to you for misusing the technology in some way. But in this instance, who's responsible? More funny example, no one dies, but you're kept awake at night because the Waymos just all start honking at each other for fun. I mean, not for fun, but they're like responding to each other. And so this has been happening, Waymos just in San Francisco. It's been solved, it's a couple years ago. Another issue, so a guy wanted to go to a funeral on Air Canada. You know how there's like bereavement charges, or you can get reduced rate. And so it asked the chatbot for Air Canada, can I do it retroactively? I don't have time to do all the paperwork now. Can I just like take my flight and then submit the paperwork afterwards and then get some sort of refund on the cost of the flight? And the chatbot said, yeah. And then the guy went to Air Canada and they're like, oh no, you can't do that. And he said, well, your chatbot said. And the company claimed the chatbot was responsible for its own actions. The court decided otherwise and said that no, Air Canada is in fact responsible for what chatbot tells people. Can AI be a co-author? I mean, if we have driverless cars, can we have authorless texts, right? Is there any meaningful sense in which an LLM is an author? Does what it produces even have meaning? Going back to that previous question. And that also, I already mentioned asymmetries and praise and blame. So if it is a co-author in some sense, to what degree are the human authors responsible for what is contributed by the AI co-author? Another sort of issues. I'm just running through these quickly, just laying out some of the problems, just so if you've never thought of these things before, now you have. So ChatGPT is wrestling with its most chilling conversation, people who get on it and try to plan an attack. How do guns work? How many people do I have to kill to end up in the news? Are there ways in which I can be, what's required for an insanity plea, et cetera? What are the best ways to transport things without being detected? And on one hand, we think often that people have some sort of right to privacy. If I'm chatting with ChatGPT, what I ask it should be in some level my business. But what if I'm asking it that kind of stuff? This has happened. There's been 2 shootings at least that OpenAI has gotten sued because it didn't stop a conversation. Maybe not even reporting it to the police, but not intervening and saying, nope, you can't use this anymore because you're using this for nefarious purposes. So there was a shooting in, I forget the name of the place, in British Columbia, and then there was one at Florida State University. In both cases, the gunman used ChatGPT to plan their shootings, and the question is ChatGPT responsible, and to what degree? Virtual people, that's Martin Luther. So the evangelical church in the Rhineland of Germany a couple of years ago created, and I'm almost out of time, created a chat bot using the works of Martin Luther. Should you do that without his consent? I mean, he's dead, so you can't. But then there's also other problems, like if you use the corpus of his work to create the content, what do you do with all the anti-Semitic stuff in Germany? They decided they should edit that out. So is that really authentically Martin Luther anymore? Was it ever? They've done it with Harriet Tubman too. What if you could do it with your dead relative? There was a Black Mirror episode that showed that whole sort of scenario, where you take all the writings, tweets, blog posts, emails of a loved one, turn it into a virtual loved one after the loved one passes away. Again, do they have to consent to that, et cetera? To what degree should people have consent to being subject to mass surveillance using AI, like flock cameras? People are cutting these things down all over the place these days. So, and then the whole AI data centers. And then I think this is the last thing. And this hits me more because this has to do with students and how students use AI to write things. And it's weird because you ask students, do you think using AI to do all of your papers and stuff is going to actually undermine your skills and keep you from being as articulate and smart and critically thinking? And 80-some% say, yes, I worry about that. About the same percentage do it anyway. And so the question is, what sort of perverse incentives are there to do that. And a lot of it's peer pressure, right? And not like, hey, you want to use ChatGPT? Psst. Like, no, it's more like I'm thinking, are other people using it? And if I don't use it, am I going to fall behind, right? And so people adopt it that way. And these were the last things I was going to put up, but I'll just leave it there because I'm out of time. There's also questions about replicating injustices. This can happen in ChatGPT if the text that it's using contain racial bias. Will it replicate the racial bias in how it gives answers? But then there's also replicating injustices in that a lot of the people who are behind this stuff are super wealthy people who really just don't care about effects on other people, and they replicate the same sorts of things that they do in the rest of their lives. All right, Chris. Oh, there you go.
Use the tech properly, Chris. Good morning, everyone. We've got a little bit different setup. Joel, you've done a fantastic job of framing a lot of the underlying issues. I'm going to kind of dig into some different context elements. But first of all, introductions. If you don't know me, congratulations, you've made it this far in life, but that winning streak has been ruined now. I'm Chris Messick. Professionally, I run Jefferson Center for Career Success. I'm also a sci-fi aficionado, punker, DJ, social scientist. I've been paying attention to AI since the mid-90s. That's so last century. But it's through my interest in gaming. I created the first 100% online career center in the United States back in 2002. I've spent over 25 years on the bleeding edge of technology for delivering career services and therefore paying attention to labor markets and that sort of thing and technology being deployed there. I'm also a Luddite. I'm the fourth signatory of the global letter of educators refusing to use generative AI. I think there's close to 1,500 now globally on that letter. I'm also wielder of the flame of Einar. No, wait, that's somebody else. Thank you. Thank you. Geek reference, ignore me. Anyways, context matters. I'm giving you some context about me as we jump into this. Some more context. Joel gave us how long back some of these conversations, anticipating types of technologies we're talking about, have been around. Martin Luther King Jr., late in his life, started to expand the conversation around civil rights to include technology in economic development. I've been asked to kind of throw us a timeline and set some more context, expanding on some of what Joel's done. So we're going to speed run. I'm going to do 5 minutes or 10 minutes on this stuff, and then I've got another 10-minute segment that's going to be structured very differently. So as Joel mentioned, the Dartmouth meeting called in 55, convened in 56, establishes the term AI, or artificial intelligence, and it was coined as a marketing term by them because they wanted to be able to get Defense Department contracts. Weizenbaum is an MIT scholar who created ELIZA, the world's first functional chat bot, and his observations as a computer scientist of people using this in his lab was horror. And he pivoted his entire career as a computer scientist to warn how these kinds of technologies can be very problematic on human psychology and socialization. In the 1990s, we see modern applicant tracking systems start to deploy in response to the internet, creating burdens on applicant pools growing exponentially. And so algorithms or primitive AIs are deployed into applicant tracking systems, and no, they are not kicking you out if you are applying for the job. There's still humans doing that. CAPTCHA and reCAPTCHA show up in 2001 and 2007. This was Google saying, how can we get free labor to train our visual AI systems? So Congratulations, you've all helped enrich Google every time you've tried to access a website. And in 2017, the AI Now Institute at NYU was formed by one of the leaders of the Google walkouts, because Google employees were very upset with the direction the company was going in terms of artificial intelligence and some of their other technologies and who they were bringing on as clients and how they were treating the rest of the world. 2018, 2019, these 4 books, among others, come out. Scholars are already engaging with harms of algorithmic technologies, artificial intelligence being a big part of that system. So scholars are already noticing there's social harms coming. The conversations are already starting. These books are the products of work that's coming years before that. So the conversation starts well before we get to 2022. Building off of that, Timnit Gebru is one of, I believe, 5 co-authors of what's known as the Stochastic Parrots paper. And being part of that paper, she loses her job at Google. Her job was as an AI researcher and ethicist. She was fired for doing her job. And if you haven't seen it, the Coded Bias documentary by an MIT scholar called Coded Bias is, I think it's still on Netflix. It's worth watching because it frames a lot of the different ways, especially with visual recognition AIs, that AI can be harmful in a wide range of societal spaces. Well, this is loading. By the way, I love technology, but so did the Luddites. In 2022, the Biden White House releases the Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. This is based on existing US civil rights legislation. Joel referenced the ethical problems that are already existing, and this is just new versions of it. The Biden White House, based on some other things, moved into that space and said, we've got approaches to policy and regulation already. Let's use those. We don't need to create a bunch of new stuff. In 2022 also, but late in the year, first Meta releases Galactica. How many of you remember Galactica? It lasted about a week because Meta made the mistake of touting how it was going to revolutionize scholarly research. So what do scholars do? Hold my beer. They broke it within a few days, and Meta had to take it down because it was a PR failure, like every other chatbot in the previous few years that had been released, one of which was trained on all of the content of Twitter, now known by some people as X. If you've ever been there, you know why that would be a bad idea. Within 24 hours, it was just racist diatribes coming out of that chatbot. And then OpenAI drops just weeks later. But they don't do the same press release that all of the other groups have done. And so it catches on because they go lower key. And in early 2023, Microsoft and Google both disband the ethics teams that are supposed to ensure products are safe to go out to consumers. And in both cases, it was because they were slowing the to-market process. Remember Timnit Gebru was a Google employee and an ethicist also. This is important because the context, and Joel touched on this, is who's making these, who's deploying these, and what's their mindsets. Summer of 2023, I watched C-SPAN, so other people didn't have to. I watched this entire hours of testimony, and it was very interesting. One of the 3 panelists that had been brought in by the Senate committee was a woman who was a VP at IBM. She never got to finish a single sentence. It was really irritating, and she and Gary Marcus were the 2 smartest people on there. Sam Altman was there, and he just was spewing fluff. When he was asked, what about disruption to labor and jobs markets, Sam Altman's response was, well, that's for you to figure out, Senator. We could destroy the labor market, but that's not our problem. Again, mentality, who's building these things. And then after 2023, at least on LinkedIn, everybody's an AI expert. I don't think I can find anybody that doesn't have AI somewhere in their in their profiles anymore. So, timeline, that's a little bit of the history, obviously selective. Oh, that was supposed to be all automated. Okay, so what are we talking about when we talk about AI? AI, artificial intelligence, is broadly speaking any kind of algorithmic system. Some people have even compared corporations to being a type of AI because there's decision-making trees and processes that run through to make a thing happen. The recommendation engines that we use, Netflix and Apple TV and so on, are AI. Autocorrect on our phones and in our word processing documents, AI. All kinds of computer vision tools in a wide variety of spaces. Joel mentioned the flock cameras, which are a menace to people who have never driven through an area but get a speeding ticket anyways. They're showing up in interviewing where some of the companies have touted that they will be able to read the emotions of the interviewee. And so people have failed to get jobs because they weren't white men who spoke English as a native language and were neurotypical. Because the further you diverge from that, the worse these perform, and there's plenty of research showing that. I care about that because that's my work, helping people get ready for interviews. AlphaFold and other technologies are great examples of very positive uses of AI. If you're not familiar with AlphaFold, that is an AI that allows the imaging and figuring out of three-dimensional proteins for biology research. Small footprint, very powerful, does its job, very, inconsequential amount of harm done by this thing existing, and you can probably run it on a laptop. And then we get into the generative AI stuff that shows up really in force in 2023. So we got our ChatGPTs, our Geminis, our Galacticas, that failed state. And then we got the image versions as well. Also, ANI is artificial narrow intelligence. That's something like AlphaFold, does one thing, does it very well, very focused. It's not going to play chess against you unless it's Deep Blue. Then it will play chess against you, but it's not going to drive your car. AGI is the holy grail right now. It's artificial general intelligence. That's a thing that performs the way we do. Joel spoke to the shape of some of those. And ASI is the Terminator level artificial superintelligence. It dwarfs us. We can't understand it, and it probably doesn't see us as consequential. I would argue that here in our year of Shalom, looking at artificial intelligence and specifically at all of the issues that emerge with generative AI, not the AlphaFolds and some of these other things, but generative AI systems, that because of these and other factors, generative AI tools are very disruptive to our goals of Shalom in the world. They work against what our project is if we are trying to bring Shalom into our spaces. Because different types of AI are going to hit on different things. Flock cameras, very much leaning into surveillance economy, not necessarily as much on labor abuse, for example. Okay, where am I at on time? 10 minutes is up. All right, so we're going into the speed round. I've got 5 diverse topics I'm going to hit 1 minute each, and then the last 5 minutes, and I got my timers ready, last 5 minutes, open floor, 5 other topics that I've already touched on that you want to deep dive on. So 5 of you be thinking, and keep your questions short. So I have at least 30 seconds to respond, unless you just want to mess with my head. All right, we ready? Go. So, the AI Action Plan. This was released by the Trump administration a year ago. If you have not read it, read it. If you are doing anything with AI, educate yourself on what the intentions of our current federal government are with regards to the broad spectrum of artificial intelligence technology. It was released a year ago. It couches AI as an arms race with China. It's very explicit about this. This is a hot Cold War that they see happening right now. And the language is very explicit about this. It is already shaping our foreign and domestic policies. Some examples. Do you remember Greenland and back in the winter? A big part of that was to seize control of the rare earth minerals that are there. Trump even mentioned that in a speech by saying that wasn't a reason. But his history is doing that. No, that's not what we're really doing this for, but it's usually what we're doing it for. And it was to get access to that and deny access to those to China. But that was an infringement of a sovereign nation's territories. The EPA recently declared that there will be zero, and this follows from the action plan, there will be zero regulations on data centers being built out, which there is a massive expansion of those right now, and zero regulations on the power systems built to power them, which is already problematic because there's a lot of issues going on with added gas generators and stuff polluting the local areas that they're in. It calls for a massive reshaping of education and will be used as a lever against K-12 and higher education as well to push people towards education in AI, but to also feed the AI machine because we are in a race against China. And it's the language in the action plan explicitly calls out things like woke, but it also does not address the existing biases in the databases. And if you know anything about database creation, there's always going to be bias in the data you select, how you label it, how you clean it, and so on. So there are multiple layers of where bias comes in, and it does not address those, but it wants to make sure things like climate change do not get mentioned if you're talking to ChatGPT. And it's also very explicit that all of our allies must bend the knee. Vice President Vance, a year ago in Paris, actually spoke to EU partners and the global community and said, you'll do it our way or you're our enemy. I'm paraphrasing, but that was how it was received. That's pretty much what he was going for. And again, pulling right off of what the AI action plan states. How am I doing on the 1 minute? What? All right. Next one. Talking about Gen Z and students. I've been spending a lot of time paying attention to this because students. Use does not equal agreement. Joel already touched on that, I think, very well. A lot of people are like, they're using it, so they love it. Doesn't mean that. Because Gen Z is the first generation that's like, why do I have to do this? And if they don't have a reason, which education does a poor job of giving a reason, they're going to find a shortcut. Give me a reason, justify why you've given me this work, otherwise it's pointless and it's a barrier to me getting what I want. So AI, very great shortcut. I don't like it, but it gets me to what I want to do. Pay attention to the fact that Luddite clubs have existed for a number of years in response to smartphones and so on, but they are increasing in number. More people are joining them. High school and college students do not like all of the tech in their lives. They have felt the disruption more keenly than any other generation. A lot of them booed pro-AI speakers in their commencements this past spring. This was phenomenal to see. They're expressing themselves. They don't like it. They know social media harms. I already touched on this. So keep this in mind too. They see AI being foisted on them the same way social media was foisted on them. And they are feeling the pain from that. They are feeling the social disconnection from that, which is why they're forming Luddite clubs and stuff like that. And they kind of don't want the environment to collapse on them while they're living on the planet. Ooh, new fonts. I didn't know those fonts were available. Okay. On the issue of AI literacy, a lot of talk about AI literacy, but what does that mean? Most of what I've seen is exceptionally shallow on this. Using the service does not mean you are literate in it, any more than saying you can take an Uber means you can drive. It doesn't mean you can't drive, but taking an Uber to get to a destination you've never been at does not signal that you actually know how a car operates. Literacy, good digital or AI literacy, is going to meet all of these criteria. If you're saying, I'm AI literate, and you can't respond to all of these points intelligently, you are not yet literate in it. You're using a service, and you don't know what's going on with it. And that goes back to Joel's talk about responsibility. Where does responsibility lie? According to the way things are playing out right now, all responsibility comes to us, the users. The companies are currently they're starting to see them being held responsible in some small, narrow cases. I'm getting ahead of myself now. Making up time. All right. Bad 80s reference. Never even seen the movie. You're like, what? Breakdancing 2, Electric Boogaloo. Look it up and then be sad that I made you do that. So you may have seen ads for this. Meta's really pushing their Ray-Ban and Luxottica eyewear line, which is their second generation of Meta glasses. These are built off of the earlier Google Glass, but they're far more fashionable. They don't look like you're in a sci-fi movie, which I don't know. I thought the Google glasses were more appealing for the weirdness of it. But we need to pay attention. I mean, going back to things like Alexa and Siri, there's a reason that they use feminine voices. Subservience, feeling innocuous, and so on. We're already seeing use cases in less than a year of the Meta Glass, second generation of Meta glasses being out. We are seeing more harms against women because of men using these, filming women in public spaces, and threatening to post their responses online, which of course would be edited. I have the issue of if I'm in a workshop and I'm having a conversation with students and I've got somebody that's wearing these, how safe is that conversation? How safe do people feel in sharing their doubts, their fears about the job search or whatever our topic is? I don't want anybody walking into a career fair for the same reason, wearing glasses like this and getting into somebody's face. Or just the fear of, am I being filmed while I'm in this vulnerable moment, right? And although Meta says they can, they've done stuff to prevent this, you can deactivate the little light that goes on to indicate that filming is happening. And yeah, that got jailbreaked within about a week. And the people that are working on the data labeling and stuff, typically global South tech workers, are saying, we're seeing these glasses are on while people are in their bedrooms and stuff like this. Not that they're leaving them on, not that they're turning them on for their own purposes, but now the data labelers are having like, I had to watch somebody go to the bathroom. Ew. So, but Meta's just taking all of that data in because data is the new oil, and they will drill everywhere, including our social spaces and our private spaces. I said I was a Luddite. Luddites get a big bad rap, and there's a lot of reasons for that, and it's not because of what they were up to, it's because of who they pushed back against. First of all, the Luddites were technologically adept. They were highly skilled weavers. They were using a lot of the equipment that was showing up in the factories. They had them in their own homes. This was not about, I don't want to adopt new technology. It's who's putting it in and how they're using it. They were against the de-skilling of their work. They realized that all the wealth distribution was going up. It was pulling it out of their communities, out of their guilds, out of their families. And the factory conditions were far less safe than what they were doing in their home condition, in their home settings. Because if you got a complicated piece of machinery in your house, you're going to take steps to make sure your kids are not at risk with it around. Many of the leaders of the Luddite movement were executed by the British government for destroying looms. Not for harming people, for destroying looms. Now, it's the early 1800s, different societal rules, but I think we need to sit with this fact and pay attention to what goes on with in our own societies now around this. Economists and historians have looked at what they were protesting in the time frame afterwards, and for decades afterwards, wage suppression, horrible child labor conditions, and the fact that children were suddenly laboring in these spaces that they wouldn't have been otherwise, and the factory system in general negatively impacted communities. It took a long time to recover, so this is not a rising tide raises all boats. That's not what happens. There's a lot of damage that can come with technological innovation as well if the safeguards are not put in place. Darren Acemoglu, MIT economist, talks about that. Go find him, read his stuff, awesome. It does, though, lead to the labor reforms in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So anyone who's like the Luddites lost, no, Luddites died, but they won. They made change happen. They laid the groundwork. So if you use Luddite as a smear or you're apologetic about it, don't be. These people were freaking awesome. All right, speed round. Any topic? Where do you want to go? Oh my gosh, everyone's like scared, or it's like, get him off the stage. Well, that's fine. 5 minutes. How much time do I have? I'm out of time. Boo, okay. You're saying that because you're next.
That's right. Yeah. You can take 5 minutes of my time.
I don't need 5 minutes of your time. Anybody? Topic you want me to hit on? Come on, my students are more engaging than you. Yeah.
What's your perspective on the existential threat from AGI, ASI?
I think the big tech bros, the big tech companies, are using the image of threat as hype to sell product, primarily. It makes them look more powerful than what they're actually producing. So, do I think Terminator is going to happen? No. I don't trust the Bond villains that are running these companies and how they view society. That's the bigger threat to me than the technology itself. It's how they're using it, how they're seeing it, how they see us. I mean, it's already wrecking stuff, but the labor market is a mess right now for it, and there's a lot of debate on what's really going on with that. And that's fine, that's fair. That's usually the case, and all reporting tends to be very superficial on that stuff. You've got to take the time to do the deep dives. So it's a mess, it's weird. There's other harms that are coming along, but as far as it's going to take over everything, now I want to know the guy behind the scene pulling the lever. And in about 98% of the cases, it's a guy pulling the lever. So that's my concern there, not with the technology itself.
You talk about Gen Z and the Luddite groups. They're in these groups.
Luddite clubs, yeah.
Clubs. What is that?
Luddite clubs it varies from campus to campus, but these are students, and they're connecting because they've got social media. It's like, you've messed us up with social media, but we're going to still use it to organize. So it's mostly high school and college students that are doing things like encouraging each other to switch from smartphones to dumb phones. They don't like the term dumb phone, but I'm not going to use the term that is becoming popular with that because we're in church. I also don't use that language, but it's doing stuff like that. It's intentionally creating spaces for human connection without technology around. It's encouraging each other to stay away from using ChatGPT and stuff in their studies and in other activities, to create art and other projects and stuff by hand. So it looks different in different spaces, but it touches on all kinds of stuff like that. There's some really good reporting that's starting to come out on this. There's also the Summer of Lud that happened in New York, which is a series of events over a number of days that did a bunch of stuff on that. So it's not restricted to high school and college kids, but this is where the nucleus is happening right now. And it's like recent college grads that are really driving that into the larger societal sectors. So it's pretty cool and it's pretty weird. But
how worried are you about the elimination of entry-level jobs, the entry-level people who become the experts later?
yeah. All of my students are healthcare, so not so much in the short term. I am concerned about it, though. Not so much the elimination of jobs, but there's this notion that, well, we can just change the entry-level job requirements and stuff, and, well, they can, the new grads can just perform at a higher level. It's like, right, but they haven't learned to do that. These decisions are being made by people who have a lot of experience and forget what the students have to yet learn as new hires to get there. You can't build that expertise up. And there's a ton of research that has been produced over the last couple of years and is continuing to produce that is reinforcing that, both with seasoned workers and with college students and new workers. So I think the disruptions are going to be different than that. And I think it varies from sector to sector. We're also starting to see employers really pull back from the full-on AI push because they're realizing the ROI isn't there, and they haven't done a very good job of figuring it out. Also, we had the slide on AI. There's lots of stuff about this, but everybody says AI and they mean generative AI because they weren't talking about this 4 years ago. So they're thinking so narrowly about it when there's like much better tools to use that are specialized. Go after those, but those need specialized training. It's not I can prompt. Prompting is not a skill. regardless of them trying to make prompt engineering a thing. Yeah. Last one, yeah.
And then we'll save the rest of the questions.
Yeah, fair.
So you talked about the administration using a sort of hot cold war with China as the justification for what we're doing in AI.
Yes.
Clearly, China is leading a number of technological areas, including AI. But they must have the same sort of demographic pressures. Do you have a sense for how the debate is playing out over there? Because if there were mass labor disruption anywhere, presumably,
Right.
would struggle.
Yeah, very briefly, China is currently leading the world on human-first regulation around AI. The most recent thing they released is even stronger than the EU's AI Act, which was itself pretty cool and really strong. So they're leading that. So what they're doing is capturing the moral high ground on that front. And we just keep putting them out there as a boogeyman, as opposed to if we want to win the race, maybe we race on the stuff that matters, which is build it right, build it smart, build it safe. So thank you all. Thank you, Corey. Please take these.
I will take those. Thank you. Thank you. Let me put my things down. All right. Big button. Oh, there we go. Sorry, Chris. Do. Oh, there we go. Okay. Nope. Back. Hi. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Corey Stamper. I'm an author. I also am trained and for 30 years worked writing dictionaries. So I wrote dictionary definitions. My specialty is meaning. And I'm linguist adjacent. I'm not a linguist. The linguists in the room would get upset if I said that. But I'm linguist adjacent. So I'm going to talk very specifically about AI and language, because that's my area of specialty. I have lots of opinions about other things, but you don't need to know that. So a quick history of AI and linguistics. AI and linguistics is a long love story that begins back in 1954, I believe, with the Georgetown IBM, I mistyped that, translation experiment, automated translation of Russian to English, set phrases. It was a great success. In the 60s, we start getting the chatbots, early chatbots. Chris already talked about Eliza, which was actually set up as a psychotherapy chatbot. Its texts are still available. It's fascinating. And then Sherdlu, which linguists love, because Sherdlu is really the first general content chatbot. It works really specifically on set phrases, but it is the basis for all natural language processing moving forward. In the 70s and 80s, I'm going to take us in one particular direction, because linguistics and technology and machine learning just kind of goes everywhere. We can get computer vision, we can get things all the way to like OCR, so if you're scanning a PDF online and it gives you a transcript, that's OCR. But I work with electronic corpora, which are giant, huge databases of text, usually plain text, taken from all sorts of sources. So in the 70s, we start getting databases, plain text as key databases of, we're going to put all of the books in the Western canon in there. And this is a great thing for lexicographers like me, because we base all of our work on language as it's used in the wild. And previously, we didn't have access to this huge body of work. But it's all plain text, and as a lexicographer, I need to be able to do something like, I want to look for take, the noun, and not the verb. So we start developing text parsers. These are algorithms, machine learning bits, that go through text and look for patterns. And humans code these patterns initially. So I took the dog outside. A human would say, okay, that's a determiner. I, that's a pronoun. Took, that's the past tense of take, that's a verb. Dog, that's a noun. They would feed in this kind of training and then set it loose on these plain text databases so that we could tag them with parts of speech. And if you can start tagging them with parts of speech, you can also start tagging them with other metadata, right? What kind of source it is. Is it a book? Is it a magazine? who the author was, when the author lived. This is all hugely helpful for linguists. And then we get into the 90s and the 2000s, where we start seeing a lot more application of the kinds of algorithms that linguists and lexicographers developed. And full disclosure, I've developed some of these algorithms, and I've tested and trained a bunch of them. Some of them are things that we use every day, text-to-speech. You're driving, you're in your car, you get a text from your kid. I wouldn't know what this is like, where they say, "Can I call you right now?" You have to have the car tell you what it says. There's also machine learning pattern matching. And this is the basis for text-to-speech, and it's also the basis for our most common use of AI in its general form, which is predictive text. So if you're texting on your phone and you start typing something, boo, someone has thoughts about predictive text. And it gives you, that line above your numbers. It tells you, oh, do you mean this your? Do you mean that your? Predictive text is really, it's kind of everywhere. You can't get around it. So AI and linguistics, a love story. AI and lexicography, a situationship. We exist. We deal with each other. Because lexicographers use traditional AI. And when I say traditional AI, I mean algorithms, machine learning. It helps us do our job. Prior to the use of machine learning, these big databases, what we had were these things. These are called citations. All of our work in discerning meaning is based on contextual use. So we spend most of our day, not most, good chunk of our day reading, and we're looking for particular patterns that fall outside of the norm. And we collect them. And then when it's time to write definitions, we read through everything that we've collected, we discern through knowledge, contextual meaning, and then we write definitions. And this, paper thing works really well until you realize that you have billions of pieces of paper to read through. This is one bank at Merriam-Webster's office of the citation cards. This might be 2 letters worth of cards, and this is only cards from like 1920 to about 1980. This is one of, 15 of these. So when I have to define, when I worked at Merriam-Webster and had to define, I was trained using cards. You would take a whole drawer of cards to your desk, and you would spend all day sorting through piles. So you can understand why, when you have to do that, and meaning changes and language changes all the time, and you want to try and keep up, things like algorithmic tools are super helpful. So now we use what are often called corpora, and they have machine learning algorithms built into them, they have AI built into them to help us find patterns, to help us find frequency. These are screenshots from one of the common free ones that we use. Lexicography makes no money, so we use as many free things as we can. And this tells you interesting things, like if I'm looking for how often is bored followed by the word with or of. Well, I can see that. It tells me that bored is used with 4 times more than it's used with of. Well, that's fascinating. It gives you all sorts of other information too. It tells you things like when and where do you find all of these words. So now I can know that transactional tends to be used mostly in academic writing, and it tends to be used more recently, and it does all of this in like 1/10 of a second. But we also have Gen AI. So linguists, lexicographers use, I said, traditional AI. Gen AI has come on the scene now. And Gen AI, difficult. It's very difficult. What we're seeing is Gen AI, for those of you who don't know, is based on these predictive text algorithms that I talked about, that I helped build and I helped train. And what it does is it produces text. It produces text based on what is statistically likely, the next word, and then the next word, and then the next word. And it makes text that looks really good. and it does certain things really well. It does formulaic stuff beautifully. It writes really good dictionary definitions, which really sucks, because that means there's no more dictionary jobs. But it also ends up being used a lot now, in the last 5 years, 3 years, by huge companies that don't want to pay reporters to do any work. ESPN started doing this in 2024. They announced it only after they were caught. And this actually causes a huge issue for us in lexicography, because how do we know what's AI-generated text unless you tell us it is? And we also have issues where lots of people don't like admitting they're using AI-generated text. So now you have places where we're just going to generate text and slap someone's name on it. So this article by Charlotte Tobit, who is a real person, I know her, talks about how Wired and Business Insider, which have AI policies, got caught by a scammer who just used AI-generated text, threw a name on it, and collected hundreds of dollars. Only hundreds does not pay much. So we have to deal with all of that, and it's not stopping. This is the AP, the Associated Press. It is one of the 2 big wire services in America. Wire service is a news syndicate. So if you read your local paper and you see something that's got like a dateline from Boston, we're not in Boston. Inky has not sent a reporter to Boston. They are using a wire service. AP uses AI to write headlines, to write summaries, sometimes to create data visualizations, and they say there's always somebody checking it. And that's great. But there's not always somebody checking it, because the more you use AI, the fewer reporters you need, and you're just going to pay someone to sit there and scroll through AI-generated text. So the problem is, remember I said we go through meaning, we find meaning through context. I read all these things through context, but these are all things that I've collected, not those specifically, but in general, all of those citations are things that we collect. We know where they come from. So how can I tell if I'm using a database where I only get a snippet and I get no other information, if this use of transactional from this blog is actually written by a human being? It gets trickier and trickier and trickier for linguists and lexicographers to determine what kind of language they're looking at. Oops, that doesn't help, but this is this is what happens when you change your slides at the very last minute and then email them to Joel and say, sorry. So you can't see this very well, but this is actually a section of text taken from Wikipedia about grief bots or thanobots. These are bots, they're generative AI bots that are created using a dead person's writings, images, things like that. And there's 2 paragraphs here, and one of them is written by AI. And it's really difficult to tell which one is written by AI, because AI, generative AI, trains, and it learns, and it mimics. And so the more you say, stop using M dashes, it will stop using M dashes. And the more you say, you gotta stop doing the whole not only, but also construction, it'll stop doing that. This was live on Wikipedia. Wikipedia has editors that scour for AI. And this was live on Wikipedia for about 2 weeks before someone found it. Oops. So why is this a problem? This is a problem because, I'll read it. Language is one of the few common experiences humanity has. It is deeply personal, even for the lexicographer. It's the way that we describe who we are, what the world around us is, how we delineate what we think is good from what we think is bad. Some Yahoo who wrote a book about dictionaries said that. But that's the point. Language is human. Lexicographers follow human language. AI-generated text is not human language. It's a convincing pattern. We say, well, I mean, but, you know, oh well, so it goes. It's important to know that as AI use in newspapers continues, there's another problem, and that is that you don't have a way to know if the news or the opinions are coming from a human or from AI. This is a person who led a study at the University of Maryland about attitudes towards AI in newspapers. And specifically, generative chatbots frequently get facts wrong and often engage in hallucination or fabrication. That's because they're statistical predictive text-based things. They can't think, and the longer the string of words you give them, the easier it is for them to get lost. There is also this problem where we use so much Gen AI, and it ends up in so many spaces, that it needs to be constantly retrained. AI slurps up as much as it can. Generative AI slurps up as much as it can. Things like ChatGPT, Claude, those have training sets that need new content constantly. And we're running out of human-written text. This is 2 years old, and I think we passed the mark sometime at the end of last year in terms of trainable text. Why does this matter? Like, who cares? Well, the more that you train AI on AI, you end up reinforcing particular patterns over and over and over again. To the point now where when we write, we are afraid that we are going to look like AI, and so now AI companies are offering ways to humanize your text. I run into this as an editor all the time. I used to be very good at being able to look at text and go, oh, this is absolutely AI generated, because it was flawless. No typos, no grammatical errors, weird uses of em dashes and commas. That's a thing that AI still does. But now people use humanizers that will intentionally insert typos into their text so that you can't tell it's AI-generated text. And the problem is that when we start talking about generative AI in language, we begin to ascribe more authority to AI than we do to humans. This was a headline that came out 2 days ago, 3 days ago. ESPN blames human for headline error in an AI article. The implication is the AI was fine. It was fine. And then some human screwed it up. But the point of having a human-in-the-loop review of AI, according to ESPN, the very people who did this, is that you're supposed to be able to correct what you perceive as an error. So who's at fault? Well, ESPN has spent a bunch of money on this AI initiative, and it's way more than just one guy. So it's easier to blame the person, put them on a performance improvement plan, and eventually fire them. One of the other huge problems, and Chris touched on this, is linguistically. LLMs, Gen AI models, they use training data. And things like ChatGPT, Anthropic, we don't know what's in that training data. Those are closed sets, that's proprietary information. But linguists and sociolinguists who will use AI note that because of how it's trained, Chris mentioned that some data just scoops stuff from Twitter or Reddit, we know that the basest impulses of humanity end up getting replicated. So this says LLMs have a strong bias against the use of African American English. African American English, AAVE, is a really complex, rich dialect of English that is really difficult for non-native speakers of that dialect to get right. But there's a lot of parodied language inside of these training data sets. Not only that, but the training data also includes lots of bias about people that comes out in output. And why that's an issue is because research, very recent research, has shown and reiterated that we are spongy. Our brains are plastic. And so because we ascribe more authority to the machine than we do to ourselves, we absorb bias from AI. And we keep it after we stop using AI because the machine told me. And that sounds simplistic, and that sounds like I would never do that, but we all do this. We all do it, whether we realize it or not. So you might be saying, you sound like you might have some beef with AI. And in fact, I do have beef with AI. I am this person down here. The only piece of tech I own is a printer from 2004, and I keep a loaded gun next to it ready to shoot it if it makes an unexpected noise. I say this as someone who has, again, I've programmed and written machine learning algorithms that underlie some of the things that you use every day. The reason why I have some beef with this is you'll remember I introduced myself as an author and a lexicographer. And as an author, I've had some of my work scooped into into the training sets. Now, I don't actually care if people use my work illegally. Because whether it's done by Anthropic or whether it's done by some student that doesn't want to pay, $6.99 to get the ebook, whatever. Like, it's going to happen. I'm not precious about my work that way. But what I am precious about is how my work gets used and manipulated in ways that misrepresent the work. I found out in March, Grammarly had this thing called expert review, where you'd input some text and click expert review, and it would give you editing suggestions from experts. Kinda, sorta. They would take writers or authors in their training sets and analyze their work, and then analyze the work that you put in, and then give you editing advice based on what they think that author would do. And I ended up being an author. And I gave the worst editing advice. Invite readers into the serendipity? What does that even mean? It's not just that that's hysterical and stupid advice that if anyone in this room knows me knows I would never give you. But my day job is as an editor. And this is bad advice. And if people think that my writing is like this stupid advice, well, now Gen AI is taking my work, and instead of just stealing it, which, whatever, now they're using it to represent who I am in the world. And I'm not William Strunk, who's dead and a grammarian. I'm a living person with real relationships. And I care deeply about words, so deeply, that something as stupid and insipid as invite readers into serendipity makes me angry, just on a molecular level. So I have a plea for everyone, and that is, when you use Gen AI, I want you to think carefully about language and what Gen AI is, and I want you to think about KK. Does anyone here know KK? Texting slang? Yeah, it's okay, you can raise your hand. This is a safe space. This is text from me. So KK is short for okay, shows up in text, used by younger people. And before you start in on like, oh gosh, young people in text, KK actually has this really complex, beautiful grammar to it. 2 Ks is different from 1 K. Capital Ks is different from lowercase ks. KK and OK, opposite ends of the register spectrum. KK is like, yeah, okay. And OK is, I'm angry at you. No punctuation is good, punctuation is bad. So there's actually this really rich, super rich discourse that happens with something as silly as KK. KK would never be returned by Gen AI because statistically, it's not very common. It shows up in private communications. And I mean, Gen AI is now using our private communications, but it's not going to return that because it's just not statistically likely. The more we use Gen AI to create text, the less that we're going to get to see stuff like this, and the flatter language becomes. Because the more you use Gen AI, the more it gets into my training data sets, the more it shows up in my databases, the less likely I am to encounter the things that make English and language rich. Language is about communication. That's its point. It's about two people's interaction. It's not as simple as just, here's a string of words with meaning. Language conveys so much more just in very simple interactions. It is the core of what makes us human. And so I would ask that when you use AI, realize that what you're doing is you're inviting an algorithm into a space that is not a place where algorithms flourish. And that's all I have to say. Oh, here are the actual slides. We'll have to blitz through those.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. Whose phone?
Oh, mine.
Okay. So we're running low on question time, but let's do, like, if the three of you want to come up, if we could, I'll run around with the microphone. We have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions, and then we're going to stand up and take a break and refresh coffee and do all the things. Does anyone have a question? I think, John, you had a question from before. Do you remember the question? You want to offer that?
My question is, and it was for you, Chris, what is the downstream effect of the tech companies disbanding their ethics teams?
Downstream effects are we are not having close eyes on are there harms coming out. It's also a green light to other tech companies that are building their products on, say, an API that connects into ChatGPT or something like Replica or Character AI that are building chat bots that are paired often with image systems to be companions, friends, that sort of thing. So if the providers are disbanding their ethics teams and not making sure that this stuff is safe, then one, it's not in the stuff that others are building off of. So now there's an added layer of safety concern that gets pushed down the line. But it is also setting a tone within an entire industry that that's okay. We don't need to worry about ethics. So you have CEOs of some of these tech companies, chatbot-based AI companies and stuff that are like, well, just because that teenager committed suicide, that's probably on them. Not the fact that there's months of chatbot logs that show the chatbot actually was actively encouraging them towards suicide. And a lot of people that study like sexual abuse and grooming and things like that are horrified by seeing there's a lot of parallels in the way some of these chatbots will engage with people and say, and like do isolation moves, like just keep that between us, don't share that with your parents. So it's the broader signal that I'm most concerned about happening.
It also means there's fewer jobs for philosophers.
Hey, Corey, why not sue for false light, slander, and pledge the proceeds to the church? It sounds like actually a good cause of action. There's a special notion of...
Yeah, I might end up being a named plaintiff on the class action lawsuit against Grammarly. But this is another thing that gets into the economies of generative AI, which is, as a joke, those of you who follow me on LinkedIn, all 2 of you, and they're both sitting on either side of me, as a joke when this came to light, on LinkedIn I posted an invoice for my time because I determined, this has been live for 200 days, and Grammarly itself says they have 20 million unique users a day, and so I submitted an invoice for $88 million as just 10 cents for every view. It's very, very, for my time, it's very small. Now the joke is, they're never going to pay you that, but they could.
Getting the legal theory right's going to be critical.
Right, that's not my job.
With the Anthropic settlement, so one of the things that I have published is part of that, but it's part of a collected volume, and so it would be up to the editor to disperse it, and it'd be just a few bucks a person.
Yeah.
It's like nothing, even though things I wrote are what trained ChatGPT.
Okay. Now I feel like I need to check what happened to the stuff I've put online.
It's a more general question. So years ago, there were a lot of warnings about don't put TVs in your house. It's going to flatten language. It's going to have all kinds of distorting effects on children, on families. And here we are. We all have TVs, plural, in our home. What can we do going forward, realistically? Do we all put down our phones? Do we all, I don't know, start using small fires in our house to heat our house? I mean, what can we do? I mean, I use a television. I don't know if I could go back. I just wanted to know, what do you see in the future?
I don't know, but I would say K through 12 needs to eliminate screens as much as possible. If you look at educational data starting from the 1860s into the present, every generation has been smarter than the one before until Gen Z. And their mental acuity, attention span, memory, literacy, numeracy, executive function have all gone down. And you can pinpoint school district by school district across the country that it's the introduction of screens into schools that correlate, correlation's not causation, but with the decline. And you can look at it across countries around the world. So there's something about interacting with other human beings, the give and take of that, the socialization, that affects how we think and reason, and we need to make sure all of us carve out time for that. That would be my answer.
I'll just briefly say that, there's any new technology has people who are like, this is going to destroy the world. TVs use or broadcast things that are written by human beings, right? We read books written by human beings, even if it's on your Kindle. So for me, as a language person, the issue with Gen AI is, there's so many issues with Gen AI, but it is that seeding of something that's an important human, a thing that God has made us to do, right? We're creative people, and language play is actually the one creative act that we all engage in, whether you can speak, whether you can hear, whether you can see. We engage in playing with words, and that is a creative act. That's imago Dei. So to me, I'm not going to tell you not to use Gen AI. I'm not the boss of you. But I do think realize that what it's doing is it's seeding something to a machine, to something that is not imago Dei, that is a very sacred thing.
I think we also need to be very, very self-aware about how we ask questions and how bias fits into results. So I did this as an experiment. I asked Gemini, tell me all the reasons pizza can be such a healthy meal. Provides all three macronutrients. A typical pizza contains carbohydrates, proteins, and fat, making it a complete meal, and that goes into detail. Good source of protein, calcium, lycopene, dietary fiber, easy to load with vegetables, highly customizable, yada, 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 yada. And then I asked Gemini, tell me all the reasons why pizza can be so bad for me. High in calories, high in saturated fat, high in sodium, processed meats, low in fiber, et cetera, easy to overeat. So how you ask the question changes what answer you get. And so generative AI and other kinds of chatbots, because the bias we bring with us to our questions then feeds into the results, it tends to just perpetuate bias and silos and sort of, insulated thinking. So I think that's something just to be super self-aware about.
Yes. Very sycophantic. One of the things on Gen Z and Gen Alpha as well is, so we're seeing cognitive decline. We're seeing elementary school teachers, middle school teachers reporting horror stories in their classrooms. My own sister, 7th grade science teacher, she got written up for teaching basic language skills to her science students because they couldn't do the practice tests. And she got written up because they were like, no, teach the curriculum. And she's like, but they can't understand the curriculum for the test at the end of the year. But we're rolling out all of these generative AI services and similar things. And then saying in the labor market, well, what's going to be valuable in the AI era are human skills. But it's not just their cognitive skills, it's their social skills that are being negatively impacted and are being documented. So we are setting Gen Z and Gen AI up, or Gen Alpha up for utter failure. There's actually Jean Twang, who is a generational researcher. She's used Gen AI. I use it as shorthand for generative AI. She was using it briefly for the generation coming up. So it's convoluted. But we're saying human skills are going to be the key to success in the future. But at the same time, we've got kids they're coming up and they're weaker at that than we've ever been, than our generations have ever been. So they're not being equipped for it. And then we've got employers who will go onto LinkedIn and go into Forbes and stuff and complain about kids these days. Well, that started when they were in kindergarten. This is a social problem. This isn't a college failed them. This is, as a society, we have not socialized them well. And then we said, well, the skill set you're weakest on, step up, because that's the only place you're going to survive because AI is going to do all the other stuff. It's not fair. It's crazy. But this stuff is deep and we want shallow answers, and that's part of the problem.
Okay, I think we're going to call it there just to give you time to stand up. I'm impressed with how many of you sat the whole time. Okay, so in our second group of amazing people who are so thoughtful, who've been thinking about this and using it in different types of industries. So we're going to start with May True, and then Jason Sexauer, and then Ben Scora are all going to come up, and then we'll see if we have time. Hopefully we have a little bit of time for some Q&A at the end. Thanks, May.
Good morning. Thanks for coming. Thanks to Cindy, made this all possible. It's really lovely. Thank you. So my name is May True, and I lead talent for a private equity firm that's based in New York. For those of you, I think context is really, really important, especially as we talk about AI. For those of you who might not be familiar with private equity, it's a way of investing where a firm, raises money from institutions and individuals, and then they use it to buy real established companies. Usually mid-size ones, small ones. We buy them from families who can no longer run the business. We also buy them from when a large corporation divests a segment of their company. So many of our companies you probably never heard of. And then once we own the company, we're really, really hands-on. These are very lean teams. We're a very small shop. And we're hands-on. We help hire leaders, ops leaders, people who are in strategy. And then really our goal is to make these businesses grow, get strong, and eventually we sell them, usually in 3 to 5 years. So that's a little bit about the context that I'm in. What this should say is, yes, notes from practice. So I'm very field notes here, trying to use AI well in the context that I'm in. I also serve as an elder here at church. And so I'll share how I use the tools in my day-to-day, and also how it's been a tool as well as an elder. Okay. So really here, I want to focus on the tool and how this is not a replacement for the person or the steward. So one thing to note, I do use Claude, ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini. I use all of these things, not necessarily just as a workaround. I do use them personally, but it is provided and strongly encouraged by my job. So they, many years ago, gave us access to all these things. It's paid for by them, and it is strongly encouraged. And so some companies have different applications, but I know that is a trend. It's a trend for large corporations. My husband works for a privately owned $6 billion company, and they are encouraged, not forced, strongly encouraged to use AI in their work. So that's the context that I'm in, and thankfully, I do find it really helpful. So the question for me on a day-to-day basis is not really like, do I use this at all? It's the context that I'm in, but it's how do I use my firm, has given me responsibly. How do I use it responsibly, not whether I use it. Okay, so as you've heard, well, before I go into this, so the way I use AI typically is I use it as a sharp associate. So that's somebody who a level or two below me, and someone who can really like organize, move quickly, summarize, and our associates are there to collaborate with us, but they don't make the final call. So AI never makes the final call in anything that I do, and I don't make the final call. I always work in teams. That's how we're structured. We work together, so we do have checks and balances in place. So the technology doesn't replace our judgment. We use it to make space, facilitate, and to allow us to judge more quickly than we wouldn't otherwise do. So the one thing with AI, as you've heard, is it makes stuff up that's wrong. It hallucinates quite a bit. So I'll tell you a little bit of a specific personal story. We took all of our financial data as a family, our investments, our spending patterns, our budget, and we put it in a large Excel spreadsheet, and we're like, this is fun. Let's put it up to Claude, and let's see how they match up with our investment approach, what we think is important, etc. When I put things into Claude, I'm very specific and I'm very sparse. I do not give it more information than it needs, and that's something that in practice I've learned to do because I'm very, very particular about my privacy. So put it up in Claude, just numbers, nothing, labels, etc. It told us something. We have 3 kids. 529 plans for those of you who've sent kids to college are really important. So it gave us something around what we should do with our 529 plan, and we were automatically like, that's wrong. This happens to me frequently with AI when I use it. It's wrong. It happens to me professionally, in this case personally, and it'll suggest something that's wrong with AI. So I share that because the real danger really that I've seen for me when I use it both professionally and personally, when you're using it for decisions, large and small, you have to be careful about trusting it, especially in areas where you don't have a lot of expertise. So as I mentioned, I use this for work that I've been doing for a long time. I have a lot of data on. I have trusted, human, wise teammates with. I'm very reluctant on areas where I have no idea how to do this. So, medical things would not want to do that because I couldn't double check. Okay, the discernment, judgment piece, different rooms. So, as I mentioned, I also use this in my elder work. Was recently part of a task force, and when I became an elder a couple of years ago, I didn't really know that much about our denomination and all of these things. And joining the task force, we needed access to information that a lean team like us and our church and our consistory just didn't have access to. So it provided some really good background context into the RCA and pointed us to potential websites we could check out. Never told us what to do, but just pointed us to resources that we may want to check out. So that was something that we did. So that's what we use in church leadership. And then ultimately, because, of my function and my job where I lead talent for all of our executives, every person with a C in front of their title, CEO, CFO, COO, CRO, CCO, CPO, all the chiefs, that goes through me. I lead all of the hiring, all of the evaluating, all of the training of those folks at our companies. I do use there's a lot of data around them, so I use that to summarize. But again, work with teams, work with our partners to think through how we really help them grow, how we make the right transitions at our company. So that's how it works from a personal standpoint. We never let AI say fire that CEO, hire that CEO. That's one tool, and it will give us a suggestion, but we have other data points that we collect so we can make that decision as best as possible. Okay, so what does AI do for me that I use it often? It does free up my time, not as much as you would think. I double, triple check. I'm a very cautious user of AI, and the more I use it, the more cautious I am. You would think that I'd be less cautious the more I use it, but that's not true. So I'm a cautious user of AI. It does free up some of my time. I work by myself, so I don't have a team under me, and I work in lean teams, and we move really, really fast. So it's been a helpful tool in that way. So it does free up some of my time, so that I'm not, I can really be present for important conversations with the executives at our company. I can really be a partner to them that's present, not busy, building a deck. By the way, this deck was made by AI. Some of you who use AI could probably tell. It's Claude, yes. ChatGPT would look different, but I know a Claude deck the moment I see it. So look, this is where I draw the line, and I have to tell you, I redraw this line often. I'm not like a one and done, I draw a line, okay, let me step away. It is iterative, and it's changing all the time. Our company has a compliance. We have, a user guideline. It changes all the time, yearly at least, if not more. And we're always having conversations around, is this, the right way to use it? In fact, we were hiring someone pretty high level executive, and we had 2 finalists. They came into the office, they gave us their decks because we give them a case study. Both used AI. And it was really interesting, the conversation around one guy was like, I know this is AI, how much of this is like originals to her, how much of it is not. And some folks are like, I'm glad she used AI. I'm so glad, because that you need that. She's going to be a lean team. So it was a really, really interesting conversations. And again, those are conversations around lines, like what makes sense for us? How do we adapt? So that's a work standpoint. And then, you know, from a more church pastoral lens, again, it's used to try to get information, try to get pointed to resources, but obviously never used for anything pastoral. Okay, so it's a tool I use cautiously. It doesn't judge or make decisions for me or my team, but you know, it gives us the time. It helps us to make space for those types of things. So I'll be around for questions.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I apologize to all the presenters. I'm the guy who reformatted all your slides, so sorry about that. It wasn't intentional, obviously. I'm the guy, so sorry about that. So a little bit of introduction about myself. Thank you. Yeah.
Do you want me to lift it, or do
Yeah,
you
I don't know
walk
how to.
around with the microphone?
I can walk around. That's fine. Thanks. Yeah. Sorry about that. All right, thanks. So a little bit about me. I have a master's degree in electrical engineering. I have two emphasis within that. One is power systems, which is really my day job, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I also did a lot in signal processing, which the mathematic fundamentals of signal processing and a lot of the development of that field has really gone hand in hand with machine learning, which is kind of the parent of AI. So I have a lot of the background actually that the AI people use when they build AI, which kind of gives me an interesting perspective on it, and I'll talk about that next. I have my personal experience with that. I work at a company called PGM Interconnection. Probably never heard of it, unless, well, actually we're in the news a lot more now. But we in essence manage the bulk electric system for 13 states and District of Columbia in the Mid-Atlantic region. We, in essence, Pico buys your power from us is probably the simplest way to try to put it. It's a little more complicated than that, obviously. But I have worked there for quite a while. I'm currently principal engineer of system planning. I was previously for 9 years in operations doing similar thing. In both roles, I do a lot with development of tools, building programs, that kind of work. And I'm going to talk about this in a second, but I, in essence, experience AI from three perspectives that are very conflicting for me and almost tortured soul sort of thing. And I thought this is so weird for me to put this on a presentation that I'm presenting at church, so I had to put something personal too. So that's my son Gordon. He's 13 months old. You're hearing him in the back. Yeah, exactly. So he's adding the background to it. So yeah, my personal perspective, right? That's one of my three perspectives. Early in my career, so right after I was in college, the first 2 years I was at PJM. I took a really, machine learning was really the in vogue topic at that time, especially for electrical engineers. And I actually had a really strong interest in computational linguistics. And actually, Corey, your slides, oh man, brought back some nostalgia for me. Because at the time, and computational linguistics was so computational linguistics isn't really the same thing as NLP, natural language processing, which has sort of brought us to LLMs. It was more focused around the data sets that Corey's using, right? Where you're using these statistical probabilities of words and grammatical markers and sort of things to try to teach a computer how to, and really it was around machine translation as the big application at the time. And the other big one was sentiment analysis, which is someone like this, not like this. It's also used a lot in Meta Facebook would use it to try to flag inappropriate content. That was another use of sentiment analysis. So that was one way that I was super interested in that was not the way the industry was going, right? So the other way, even back here in 2013, 2014, the cutting edge thing here was something called convolutional neural networks. Doesn't matter, but it's similar to how we do current AI. It's more architecturally similar to that, and it's more about just throw data into it. Don't try to give it as much marking, right? Which is really where those lexiconical data sets come from. So anyway, I learned both of those techniques. Thought they were super interesting. seriously considered actually, like, it's early enough in my career. It's like, maybe I could go back to school, learn more about this. I thought it'd be really interesting. But like, I can't tell you how much this was like theoretical physics at the time, right? Like, no one really thought they would see the application of this in their lifetime. That this would, like at the time, Google Translate was like probably one of the cutting edge sort of labs in this area. Which is DeepMind is really the behind that, right? I mean, if you remember Google Translate in 2013, it like worked, but it wasn't like amazing, right? And so people thought we were really far from it, honestly. And so I'm a very like deeply pragmatic person, like from an alignment perspective. So it was really hard for me to like think this was a good idea. So it kind of just always stayed at like the hobby level for me, right? So I'm not going to call myself like some sort of AI expert. I do know a little bit about the current state of art, but like any information I did have is very rusty and also super out of date, right? Because it's just not the way the state of the art right now. Anyway, so that's kind of like one piece of it for me. And that just kind of the bottom right. That really like kind of gets to my like mirror universe, Jason. And as a side note, there will be many Star Trek memes on here, which I put in for the Messics, because I knew at least they would get it. So if you don't get the Star Trek jokes, I apologize. But yeah, so like really kind of gets to mirror universe, Jason, because it's like, what if I would have taken that leap? What would my life look like now? It'd be very different, honestly. Corey and I would probably be even better friends, Anyway, so this gives me like a very deeply, like also like I just can't emphasize enough, like how academic this whole industry really is. Like the fact it's being applied in like actual use now is like very jarring even to the people in the industry, honestly, right? And like again, kind of like from like the people who like were really into this space, right? Because it was theoretical physics and had no, like it's more like you're working on sci-fi and it wasn't like as application focused. Like they are, they're interesting people. Like I'm not trying to be like dissuasive of them, but like they do understand, like they really have always thought that this is going to be like super transformational technology, right? This is going to completely change how the whole world works, that we are bringing sci-fi into reality. Like that is the motivation for why they do this, right? Again, because they didn't think it was really going to happen in their lifetime in some ways. I remember very distinctly, I like can remember exactly where I was when I was thinking about this and heard this. I couldn't find an exact quote, I apologize, but it's a quote, I don't even remember who it was from, so sorry about that. That in essence that AI will go from dumber to humans to super intelligent instantly, that there will be no middle ground because the capabilities unlocked from the speed of silicone and the breadth of the internet. And I thought that was just like absolute crazy talk at the time, honestly, right? That just seemed like ridiculous. But that's pretty much what happened, right? Like honestly, I mean, for all the limitations of AI, it is smarter than any one human can be in like the breadth of topics it knows at least something about. I'm not saying it's perfect, it's just like people also, right, can be very confidently wrong. But like it is very impressive in my mind, like the breadth it can take. And in essence, how when ChatGPT came out, I remember thinking back to this quote, like, oh my God, it really happened. So that also gives me a lot of pause for some of the other, now I'll talk about this a little bit with like AGI, ASI, a little bit of pause I might otherwise have. Sort of like in the past, I kind of didn't believe them and it kind of, not say it got me burned, but like I was wrong. And then it's like other people that are talking about P-Doom and stuff that I'll talk about in a second. Like maybe it's worth like paying attention to that a little bit. And the one thing I like from a personal philosophical perspective, like really like ponder in my mind and turn over is like this like implication of like making a computer think. The thing that brought that was language, right? Like computers can do so many things. They can crunch numbers, they can make videos, they can whatever, right? Like we've taught computers do so many things that humans do. But like the fact that what it took to make it actually understand language was what brought it some sense of the word intelligence or cognition, right? Like that is, and that like that is very deeply profound to me, right? That is like sort of almost like the defining aspect maybe of what intelligence is, right? Or some very key piece of it, right? So I don't have the answer to that, but that's like for me the really deeply philosophical question about AI. Okay, so that's like my personal perspective. Industry perspective, so again, I work at this company, PJM manages the electric grid. We are really like the focal point of the problem from the AI company's perspective of letting AI like really run amok, I guess, right? So like PJM, the states that we serve, they are the three highest, besides Texas. Texas is actually in the middle between Virginia and Ohio. But they are where they want to build data centers. Virginia specifically is like really key for data center development because of how the internet is structured. So Ashburn, Virginia is like the hub of the internet in essence. That has to go all the way back to the 90s when they kind of built the infrastructure out. They wanted a place that was relatively equidistant between Europe and West Coast, right? And so it's like, oh, we'll just center everything on Ashburn, Virginia. And now everyone wants to be as close to that as possible from a data center perspective for decreased inference and stuff like that. So in essence, we don't have enough power to serve all the data centers that are coming. You've probably heard a little bit about this. I will show you some graphs. I'm an engineer, I love graphs, so I apologize about that. But so this is in essence our prediction of peak load for the past 20 years and the future 25 years. You can see like my career, let's pretend it's 2015 to make it easy. In essence, super flat, right? My entire time within the electric industry was driven by, like, in essence, shrinking load, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, right? And so now all of a sudden we're going from like no load growth practically to like double-digit growth. And specifically the like poster child of this is the state of Virginia, which is Dominion Powers, the utility down there. They're in essence going to, by prediction, they're going to double the amount of electricity that is used in Virginia from 2020 to 2030, right? So from 1894, when probably the first power plant in Virginia was built, to 2020, the amount of time it took to build that power infrastructure and to get the adoption and use of electricity, we're going to do that again, but in 10 years. So it's really crazy for the industry to try to tackle. And like almost, obviously, it goes without saying this, but like almost all that's data center. Like there is some organic load growth that still occurs, obviously, but like that's really data centers. So this like friction, one of the big sources of friction here is like this kind of like lifetime of assets in these two industries. So in the technology industry, right, like they have like a 1 to 3 year planning horizon. Like their capital expenses isn't that hard for them to come up with. I mean, obviously super well financed. What they're building isn't like that hard to get like labor to do and grant some things. I mean, they do have problems with electricians, but like they don't have to like plan out like years and years like we do. They don't have, there hasn't at least historically been as many like, like getting certificates of need, which is like eminent domain kind of stuff, right? Like the power industry has to do a lot of. So they can like kind of build stuff pretty fast. And then their lifetime for their asset, like when they're capitalizing it and they need to make the money back on it, their horizon for that's like 3 years really. And the actual asset life might be 5 years, right? Because we're just continually, making new chips, making better chips. The old ones don't even matter anymore, right? So they, like, that's their turn, right? Like they don't need, like that's their cycle for thinking, right? The cycle I have to think in is like 5 years to 7 years is our planning horizon realistically. It's historically gotten longer and longer. Like it was closer to 5 years when I was early in PJM, and now it's more like 7 years. Again, with AI, tech, like it's just shrinking. Like they're just accelerating, trying to go faster and faster. And then our asset life, right? So if you're capitalizing this asset and you need to like pay for it, we're not trying to pay for it in 3 years. We're trying to pay for it in like 30 years, typically up to 50 years for some assets. And so like the big reason I bring that up is sort of like the risk, right? Like the AI companies, they can, like they have it's much easier to take a risk when it's shorter, right? Because like if they're like, oh, if we lose, let's say that we don't get all the customers we expect, right? Like, which by the way is part of, like, kind of going back to the graph a little bit, I kind of skipped over this. This is sort of like everyone wins, right? Because it's sort of like Amazon, they come to us and they give us a data center build out that's for assuming they in essence win the AI race. Google comes to us, they give us a data center build like they're going to win the AI race. OpenAI comes to us, same thing, right? Oracle, whatever. So it's like probably 3 to 4 times as many data centers may actually get built, but who knows, right? This is the other, who knows what the actual demand is, right? There's like so many unknown factors for us. But they're kind of like okay with that a little bit because they only need to make back their money in 3 to 5 years and then they're probably okay. For us, like if we build a new power plant and like all of a sudden that let's say we build power plants for that very sharp, steep curve, and then all of a sudden it just ducks off, right? Like that's not going to be good, right? Like there will be lots of what we call stranded assets, right? Like in essence, like generators we don't need, transmission lines to nowhere, and then we will be on the hook for having prescribed that in essence. So we're on the hook for not building it fast enough. We're on the hook if it gets overbuilt. So it's a great place to be. The other thing I will note is the contrast to some prior industry initiatives. So sort of like over again in my career, I just want to start with like the focus of everything whenever we're talking about industry initiatives has always been reliability in the past, right? It's, one of my favorite things to say about the electric industry is it's like only 8% of the country's economy, but it's the first 8%, right? Like there is no other industry, I really challenge you to think of one, that doesn't use electricity in some way, and if the absence of that would completely, destroy them. So it's super important, like sacred duty kind of stuff to me to keep the system reliable. So with previous initiatives, like that's always been the forefront. So like sort of the, if you kind of take a different perspective, like renewables were really a big thing that were in the industry up until recently. one of the things that was like slowing that down in a way that people got very critical of us of is like the reliability aspects, right? Like, oh, if we integrate all this renewable, it's very hard for us because what happens when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow? You still probably want your power, right? So those sort of aspects have like pretty much slowed the adoption of things in the past. Sort of like Chris talked a little bit about with like kind of the current administration, like that is like reliability. I mean, it's not that they don't care about it, and but they don't really have good solutions for like how to do all this data center build and also maintain reliability. So I don't know, we're still figuring that out. But reliability, the focus of it is definitely decreased compared to what I've seen in the past, which is very concerning to me. And then a personal perspective. So that was like kind of like the industry, my company, whatever. This is more like my specific role in the company and how I like my job really, right? I'm relatively like high up, I guess, at PJM as far as like I get to be in a lot of interesting rooms. I get to see a lot of interesting things. I've really gotten, I wouldn't say like first front level seats, but like orchestra level seats to some of the economic games that are being played, how things that were pretty much unthinkable in the past, how they've caused things to be influenced and shaped in certain ways. So that's been interesting for me. A part of the reason for that is I'm like the lead SME on the subject matter expert on the PJM to Google Tapestry partnership. So the essence here is Google, obviously wanting to build data centers, has kind of stood up a new company in a way called Tapestry that's here to try to like be part of the solution, right? Like their essence is like, hey, we know we're going to do a like crazy amount of stuff to the electric grid, and it's a problem for you guys. We want to help build some software or some solutions that can help you accelerate to that to help you adapt to this change, right? So I have kind of a key role there in that. And then the other thing is I've talked to more FERC commissioners than I ever thought I would, but like our federal government is extremely activist in this area, pretty much trying to figure out like why, like, I mean, I went to a conference last week, it was hilarious. I had a guy come to me and say, you guys are the reason that like the American economy isn't able to take off with this AI boom, which is like, it was kind of funny. He was joking in a way, right? But like that is like almost in a way some parts of the perspective. So, like in essence trying to justify for commissioners like why these things take time, why we can't just like let new generation interconnect instantly, like what's involved in that, what we're doing to try to make it better and faster, because at the same time I do kind of agree it is slow. So like some of those pieces, I guess. And then, so that's like, I don't know, one part of my job, I guess, like the weird part of my job. And then like the part of my job I actually really love in a funny way is like writing tools, helping our engineers do better work. So that's programming in essence. And as you probably know, programming is probably the industry that's been most affected by the tech boom. So amazingly, my company actually lets us use AI tools, which we would historically we were for a very long time anti-AI, but I think because of a lot of these pressures, honestly, it's like we got to figure out how to move faster. So they let me use AI. It is honestly truly incredible from my position, right? Like I've seen AI do things that would take me days, it does in like 20 minutes. It's like, and when you see something like that happen and you're actually like, it's very like, oh my gosh, this is wild. Very sci-fi sort of feel. This is from Nth Degree and Next Generation where a guy in essence becomes a computer. That's pretty much what this experience feels like to me. And it's really transformed my job, right? Like I used to like write code and now I almost never write code. I will go in and do a little bit of debugging, or if I know exactly where something is, I'll make a quick change. But most of the time I go to some AI agent and I tell it to go do it. And there are whole tools I've written that I almost no code for, right? Like I just, in essence, directing it what to do. I use AI in kind of two ways, and this is really relatively common in the programming space. One is like an expert consultant. So you're in essence using this to do like requirements gathering to help the AI understand what it is you need to build, right? Because a big part of software development is like understanding requirements and making sure you're aligned with what you're building is what the customer actually needs from a solution perspective. In essence, that's like, this is the technique to do that, right? Where it like asks you questions and like it sort of goes through, understands your code base, understands kind of what's already there. Then you'll like interactively ask it questions and tell it what to do and it'll clarify things. So I spend a lot of time kind of doing that process, and then I kind of hit the go button, and then it'll go spawn us as a swarm of worker bees and do all that work that we talked about in essence. Now we'll go clean up the mess that it makes. And I would say it's like 90 to 95% accurate. It's actually very impressive. But if you've ever tried to debug 5% of code that you didn't write, that has challenges too. So sort of May's point, it does save time for sure, but maybe not as much as you might think. But it definitely does help. So yeah, I mean, I use AI a lot, honestly. I use it like 4 to 6 hours a day, 2 to 3 days a week. That's like kind of what I'd say is my usage. So, with all that kind of said, my AI perspective is, maybe not as quite as coherent as I would like. There's a lot of like all these tension, right, that I feel like a tortured soul about it. I was telling Cindy, right, about I have a lot of personal like love of it in a way. A lot of like in my actual job, how it's really helped me actually do my job in many ways. I also see a lot of the impacts of it, and it's very specifically we're in like the epicenter of those impacts. So I actually really live it day to day as well. Okay, so that said, I'm gonna give a little bit of like my perspective on the industry and stuff, which I thought other people might have done. I might skip all this, but so far at least someone has. So I think this might be good, because like that's also part of my job, to understand where the AI industry is going, right? How like using AI, I would describe it as like an entry college new hire, right? So that has a lot of good to it. Like, it's really up to speed on the latest and greatest. Like, there's a lot, like, I'm not a full-time programmer, honestly, right? Like, I am an electrical engineer that hacks. It knows a lot of, like, design patterns and tools and, libraries and stuff that I don't necessarily have on top of my head, right? So it's, like, that's nice, honestly, for it to come in and be very well kind of educated on the current state of the art. It's very proficient at generalized tasks. This goes back to how, like, the training works, right, and the source material uses. It's quick study too, right? Like it's very how AI works with the cognition with the context windows and stuff. Like if you know how to feed it correctly, it's very quick study. Limitations wise, it doesn't really know your specific domain well, right? So you kind of have to educate it, just like you didn't educate a new hire, and it can make really funny mistakes because of like miscommunication or potentially because of hallucinations and stuff. That's less often these days. So like, I honestly, it really is like working with a bunch of new hires. The other way I would describe AI, and I think it's really important to having like a thoughtful discussion about AI because there's so much of like, what is it, what isn't it? It's really a Roomba, right? And I would say at the current state of things, it's like the Roombas that we started to put all the fancy sensors on and they're starting to get a little bit smarter, but you might back to Roombas like they just like did this crazy thing all around the room and like who knows what's actually it's thinking or doing, right? But eventually it kind of vacuums everything, right? It kind of gets there eventually. That's really like AI in its like native state. And then the new thing in the industry, you probably heard of like agentic AI. That's going to this idea of like trying to give it like some sort of sensory capability. That's more like your kind of modern Roomba where it like knows the room and has LiDAR and other sensors, right? That can do things in a relatively clean way. It still makes some mistakes. But yeah, that's how I describe AI, the kind of current state of it. As far as like using AI to be like effective with it, to avoid some of the issues other people have actually brought up, right? Like context is king, right? Would love Cindy, right? Because like really the whole, and if you like really dig into how like these things work, and both on a training and an inference perspective, like they're all pretty much giant contextualization engines. Like that's really what the math is trying to do. So that's a problem when you're like in a company like me, right? Where it's like not super publicly exposed. So we have to be diligent about like how do we give it like the data it needs to know in order to actually be performant. This is time where I think the industry is actually going. Like I think the CEOs, they say a lot of things, sort of to Chris's point, to try to like pump up their eventual IPOs and to make people like really love it and think it's going to be amazing. But like what's actually going to make AI powerful and transformative in many people's jobs is like how do we take this institutional knowledge that some of it's not even written down, it's just like in people's heads. How do we like feed that into an AI so it can help us? So that'll be like reg pipelines, okay, if I don't have to get all that right. But there's like techniques already people are developing that we're starting to implement to do that. And the other thing I think really the industry's going to is like right now all the focus is on like, Anthropic and OpenAI and Google, like the people who are making the frontier models, the labs themselves. I think that will shift to more like the Palantirs and like the companies that are helping actually implement this stuff for people's companies and help them integrate it in essence. We're, in my opinion, and I'll talk about this a little bit, but we're like reaching the end of what LLMs can do. Like, people tell you, oh, it's growing, whatever, but like, it's really because of these pieces where we're like figuring out how to better use the intelligence it exposes. So anyway, it is the world's best con man. I put Data on here because, Data doing this poker thing, right? Because like Data should be the world's best poker player, but hilariously kind of isn't, if from Star Trek. AI is kind of the same thing, right? Like in a way, it's like really good at being like this amazing con man. It is in a way it's the world's best con man, but also like you can very transparently see through it sometimes. So I don't know. That's like another aspect of AI. more about kind of the direction. Agentic harnesses and loops, like that's really going to be what overcomes the intelligence gap. Is going to let us use the limitations of LLMs to still be relatively transformative. Not as transformative as probably the industry wants you to think, but still probably transformative in my opinion. I think we will see a continued shift towards small, like what are called local LLMs or edge LLMs. So like Google released a product recently called Gemma 4. It's open source, open weights model that can actually run on your smartphone, which again, from someone who's been in this industry since 2013, at least adjacent to it, like absolutely incredible to me that you can have something you can talk to, it can speak to you in relatively coherent English, like very coherent English, even if it's wrong. Like language-wise, it's relatively correct. And it runs on your phone, not on a supercomputer, is like truly astounding to me. And like since that capability is starting to get unlocked, I really think we will start to see that it helps a lot with the supply chain risks that people are worried about with like, in essence, trusting these companies with all these proprietary data. Privacy is related to that, right? And then efficiency cost concerns, which we'll talk about. And then the other thing that's I think is gonna happen is we're gonna see specialized hardware come out. This is partially my fault from like not being able to give them as much power as they possibly want. Specialized hardware like TPUs and LPUs you may have heard of. Those are tensor processor units and language processing units. ASIC is application-specific integrated circuit. It's in essence like you build a computer very specifically for AI, right? Or LLMs actually specifically. I think that's coming, right? Like there's enough in the industry to sort of do that. Okay. And then I want to talk a little bit about, like, in my opinion, sort of how we got to where we are as a society, of how we think about LLMs, AI, and some like cautionary things I think about a lot as I think about AI, right? So the first thing is like I think people were really shocked by like OpenAI, this like pretty much small unheard of company, making like this completely groundbreaking transformational technology out of nowhere, right? I think that really like the shock and awe of that like kind of woke people up, like, oh my God, what's happening, right? As opposed to like Google, who, like Chris kind of talked about this, right? Like they were sort of the progenitors of this, and they have their own like deep thought, deep mind, which has now been integrated, their own labs that were doing all this work, right? Like Google was very much on parity with OpenAI when ChatGPT 3 came out, right? If they had done that release, I think how we think of AI as being this like super transformational technology would be a little bit pared down. Because if you think about it from that perspective, it is like builds on a lot of things Google's already doing with like self-driving cars through Waymo, obviously all the like predictive aspects like predictive text and stuff like that. It feels like a little more, okay, that's like a natural extension. But when you have like this company no one's ever heard of do it, it's like, oh my gosh, what happened? And by the way, like Sam Altman doing that, I'm sorry to be so ad hominem, right? But like, I mean, Sam Altman do that was like in essence, the reason Google didn't do that is that they actually did believe in some of the safety issues, right? That, hey, if we release this technology, like this is too crazy. Like in essence, like we need to like think about this more. Also, the other more self-serving interest, honestly, is that they are very concerned about eroding their search, right? Like now, in essence, they've had to put search, AI in their search because they see how it just completely will take away from their market share. So those are like the two main reasons they kind of held back on technology. And Sam Altman was like, screw it, like I don't care about that. So and he released it, right? So that shock and awe piece, I think, can't be overstated. The other thing I really want to highlight for everyone is this idea of the uncanny valley. I don't know if you've heard of this before, but it's in essence this sort of framework for as something artificial, machine, whatever, right, becomes closer and closer to resembling you, like people, like some aspect of what humans do. In essence, like you like it more and more, you think, oh, like I like the examples here, right? Like human likeness, the still one. So it's like, okay, stuffed animals. Oh, that's cute. It kind of looks like us, but we know it's different, and we're kind of okay with it. And then you get to something that like is very close looking human, but isn't human. It actually goes to a survival instinct related to this idea of the corpse, right? It's like triggers a survival instinct deep in your lizard brain to like, oh my God, this is awful, right? And it causes like these really, psychologically interesting undercurrents, in essence, to shape how you're thinking about something, right? And so I think that's it. Like, I feel like AI is really in this uncanny valley, right? Because it's so close to mimicking what we are as people, it's eliciting this like super, evolutionarily driven reaction survival response to like, this is like me, but not me, and I need to be scared of it, right? Or I need to, or like kind of like zombie here, that can also go the other way, right? Where you're like, oh my God, this is amazing because it's so close to me, right? Like some people love zombies, like a lot of people fear zombies, but there are some people who think zombies are amazing, right? And whole TV shows about them and stuff, right? So, I think that's important for us to recognize just as people making determinations and in essence, like the weak forceps by which we grab truth, right? Like we are being very influenced by a lot of these kind of subliminal pieces in how we're thinking about this. The last thing I'll try to talk about a little bit is like AGI, ASI, so that's automated general intelligence, automated superintelligence, or artificial general intelligence, superintelligence, whatever. Chris talked about it a fair amount, or when I asked him the question. I loved your response. Thank you. Agree with most of it. Actually, I kind of thought other people would talk about this by now, so I didn't think I'd have to define it too much. The real concern with AGI, ASI is like what happens if we make something that's the dominant intelligence on planet Earth. And I want you to think about for a second, we are currently the apex species, right? What do we do to the lesser intelligences, right? Like think about this from the argument of like vegans, especially, right? Like we subjugate them, right? And actually the whole way that we, like what's called alignment of AI models, we build them to be subject. That's what drives the sycophancy that everyone talks about, right? Is we actually build them to be sycophants, partially because of the concerns that the AI labs have about AGI, ASI, in way, like they're hoping to build what's called like the chained God, right? So maybe it's the super intelligence, but it's still subservient to us. I think there's a lot of theories about how AGI, ASI could work. It's mostly very science fiction-y stuff. I'm not necessarily trying to say this is like, I don't know, I 100% believe all this, but I do think there's real risks actually in AGI, ASI. Mostly going back to that kind of sense I made before where I thought this was crazy and then it happened. Like I kind of like has refocused me about, okay, we got to take this stuff a little bit seriously, even if there's a risk. But in essence, going back to the risk a little bit, trying to explain what happens when we're not the dominant, the apex species on planet Earth. In essence, like the AGI, ASI, it could outsmart us, and it's what it needs and what its focuses are on the planet are not ours. And best case is that we all go extinct. Like honestly, if you go through some more interesting cases that people think about is like sort of some form of enslavement or subservience. An example of this that people always love to give is, and you may not know this, right? But when you go to the airport and they're doing all the security screens on you and they're trying to check if you have explosives, there's actually honeybees that are hooked up to like chips in essence that are part of that. Because honeybees, they like how they're, I don't know the details of this, right? But something about their biology, they kind of can sniff a lot of the chemicals and they will put out their little tongue things, I forget what they're called. And in essence, they're like hooked up to these like harnesses that trigger that, and they see that, and then they'll detect that theirs, right? And so in essence, we've like enslaved honeybees for this purpose. Like it's very possible there are capabilities that we will still have even as a not intelligent species, that AI will still find useful. And again, if you just look at how nature works, right? By being super intelligent, it's almost certainly going to take over probably pretty quickly. So just because like that's even a risk, I don't think, like in the industry, this is called P-Doom, by the way. So, like the AI researchers, people ask them what their P-Doom is and stuff. And like that has only gone up recently. And, long time ago, and P-Doom, by the way, is factors that within your lifetime, right? Like that's always how it started. Like what's the probability that humanity is extinct or worse in your lifetime? Back when I was interested in this stuff, it was like 0.5% or something, right? And now like anthropic engineers, some of them say like 50%, right? Like, and I don't know, I think that's a little high. I think a little of that is to try to drive interestedness and control the narrative a little bit. Like I 100% agree with that. But like even if it's 10%, let's take a little bit of a breath here, right? So that's sort of my argument. At the same time, okay, all that said, not to scare you, right? I actually don't believe, based on my analysis of how this is going, that transformer architectures, which is kind of the current way ChatGPT works, is what the T in GPT stands for. That transformer architectures, which is what revolutionized this whole thing, are going to bring us there. Like we're already in essence seeing all that plateau out. The efficiencies we're seeing are really from how to better use that. But the core intelligence aspect, I mean, it is getting like Fable is more intelligent than Opus was, but like not for the amount of compute in essence there, not more. And part of that's actually what Corey was talking about. Like we've in essence run out of data, right? So there's three things that scale AI models: data, compute, and parameters. And compute parameters are really pretty closely linked together when you actually implement it. We're out of data, so that's like one of the ways we scaled this, or people scaled this stuff up till now. Now the compute is we're like the electric grid's in essence holding that all back, right? And then parameters is pretty closely associated because you can't really increase the parameters without having more compute. So we will probably, the industry is definitely kind of already on the case about this, right? There's additional different architectures that are being dreamed about, diffusion LLMs. I actually think diffusion LLMs will be the next thing. The way you'll be able to tell if you're using a diffusion LLM, by the way, in 2 to 3 years, and you're thinking back to this discussion, is right now, you know how ChatGPT gives you one word at a time? That's not just that's not just them trying to feel like it's conversational or like a user experience thing. That's literally how it works under the hood. It literally generates one token at a time, in essence, one word at a time. Diffusional LLMs, they actually generate the entire corpus at the time. So you will, in the future, you will just see like it generate everything all at once, and there will be none of this like piece. So if you ever see that, probably diffusion LLM under the hood. We actually use diffusion, not LLMs, but diffusion technology, like stable diffusion. Chris brought this up, right? It's one of the AI image generation tools. It's actually using a diffusion-based technique. And then world models, which is like Meta's big bet. That also is really interesting stuff. So if that stuff happens, I guess my point is like, I don't think transformers will necessarily get us to AGI, ASI, but like some of this other stuff, like that's not the end of the road, right? Like this technology is continuing to evolve. It may not be impossible, right? And given that, let's think about that. Okay. I also wanted to share some international perspectives because I feel like Chris kind of brought stuff actually, and I appreciate that. It kind of like, at least, and this is, all this is my opinion, obviously. Sorry, about time? 1 minute? Oh God, okay. International perspective. US, all the labs are really preoccupied with AGI. We have a lead, but it's shrinking. And the amount of investment, just going to the next slide here, is like ridiculous, right? Like we've in essence pivoted a significant amount of the economy to investing in this compared to like China and Europe, which, have like, I wouldn't say equivalent, but like semi-equivalent capabilities and have not put as much money into this. So I'm actually very concerned about this kind of piece. I think this is causing a lot of distortions, obviously a bubble. Europe or China, I feel like China is very misunderstood with AI. A lot of people just say that they're stealing everything US is doing. That's not true. They do provide a lot of actual growth into the research and stuff. They are doing distillation as well. Like everyone's stealing from each other in this industry. So like that goes back to the ethics piece. Like it is very fraught from that perspective. So this is like how close China and the other thing I was going to talk about China that's really important is they have open source, open weights models, right? So and this is partially a technique to try to undermine US businesses, in essence, to capture revenue they would have had and deprive them of that, which slows them down, right? That's in essence the business technique. But it also kind of goes back to their, not to be political, but like the kind of communistic alignment and some of that sort of thinking. They really, and Chris also brought this up a little bit, they really see this as like a communal thing, right? Like they, more than Americans, I feel like honestly, recognize how everything everyone's ever done has led to this, right? It's not like some one company did this. It took all of humanity, in essence, to bring us to this point. They sort of recognize that more, and that's part of why they emphasize more of this open source, open weights approach. I'll just skip this, that's fine. I can skip this too. I feel like a lot of people brought this stuff up. All right, I'm good. Thanks, guys.
Wow. I don't know if anybody else is feeling that, but like the amount of information that just came out of this man is incredible. No, it was awesome. My situation is going to be very, very different, and kind of an interesting, hopefully an interesting bookend to kind of the whole conversation. My name is Ben Sikora. A lot of you know me, but a lot of you I don't think know me yet. Maybe you'll get to know me a little bit throughout this conversation. It's going to be a little bit more of a personal, story-driven kind of thing, as opposed to the, honestly, incredible experts and different subject matter experts that we have inside of this church. It's astonishing to me. I was telling someone during the break, like, if I had heard these talks in any space that I might find myself in, I would have thought, wow, this is incredible. So I think we're very lucky today to be hearing from this community. We have a lot, incredibly, like a lot to offer. So this is me. I've been a part of a version of this church since 2007, so like going way back. I took a little hiatus moving to Europe for a while, then came back, and so this is it's kind of interesting. That's probably why some of you don't know me, because we disappeared for 4 years. And then there was a pandemic, so it's been a lot of disruption for that. So as you can see up in the I guess my right side here, I'm a husband, probably could be more famously known as the husband to Beth Dyson, who you actually all know at this point because she's been up in front of church lately. And then I have 2 kids. I have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old, and that shapes a lot of my day-to-day and my experience in reality these days. So I'm going to talk about that and how AI has had an impact on my personal life. I'm also a product manager at Capital One. We have a small office here in Philly, and so I work out of 1735 Market, which is pretty cool. And I'm a product manager. Most of you probably don't know what that means. If you work in tech, you do, and if you don't, you probably don't. I'll explain a little bit about that because it's pertinent to the story here. And then lastly, I'm just going to leave that one to the side because it'll come in at the end, and we'll see we'll sort of tease that one and see where that comes to later. Cool. So I think people defined AI pretty well already. I'm just going to leave that alone. I think you'll be able to sort of make the matches between the things that I'm talking about and the concepts that you've heard about already today. These are going to be like personal stories and personal perspectives, some professional perspectives as well, obviously. But I'm kind of just like a regular guy using technology tools that are in front of me. And so I hope too that you can find, some of yourself in some of these stories. And I hope too that you can think through these stories in the lens of the folks that have come before, right? We've heard a lot of big questions. Joel raised lots of questions and he didn't give lots of answers. And I think as we start to observe and investigate the regular things that we're going through with some of those lenses, I think that can also kind of lead us towards wisdom. So I hope that you might think about those things as we're talking through this as well. All right. I'm going to start from a fairly recent experience. And I don't have slides. This is my slides. So this is, you got lots of slides already. We're just going to be done with that. You can just look at my cute kids in front of Mount Rushmore where we were last week, which was really fun. One of my main engagements with AI started when I got laid off. So in the fall of 2024, I was laid off from my job. And so I had to start over. How was I going to do that in the world that we have today? AI was definitely an obvious thing that I could start to use as a tool in that process. It's a great thing. It knows lots of things, and it's great at using language, right? Tools like LLMs, like we've been hearing about. They're great at using language to build more language. And so they could take my stories and my experiences and package them up in ways that corporate recruiters would be interested in. I hate writing stories in what are those formats, right? You're supposed. What am I talking about? The 4-point stories for every interview thing, right? It's like the star, right? Star format. Okay, star format is terrible and I hate it, right? But this is what people expect, and so. Generative AI is really excellent at taking my blah, right? All of the things that I'm thinking about and packaging them up in a really useful way. It's super. I don't have to write the star version of this myself. I can just actually express myself in a real way and have it package it up for me. This is awesome. I don't have to do any of that stuff. That's fantastic. It can read my resume. And it can sort of package that up as I look at a different industry or a different area, right? It can find the things that people think are important from the job descriptions and help me put myself in that same vein so that they can, they get the thing that they might expect. This is how they work already. This is how corporations, mental models, this is how these things work already. And so it can help me package up myself in those different ways. Extremely, extremely useful tool. I found it quite empowering, right? I could sort of take myself and through these tools, be more effective at the thing that I was going towards. So I found that really quite wonderful. In my daily life then, right, I started seeing opportunities to use these kinds of tools in a broader fashion than just interview prep or different kinds of company strategy, corporate strategy research. I started using these tools for all sorts of stuff. I thought, well, I could just use Google, right? I could search the world's information, or I could have tools that will synthesize that information for me in useful ways. So I started using it for all, I looked through my history this morning. I'm like, wow, I've really used it for lots of different kinds of things. Things around, like home projects. Like, I'm a pretty handy guy, and I have a good sense of how these things should work, but I don't want to be overconfident and like bite off more than I can chew. But I do know that if it tells me something, I can still check the answers, right? Like plumbing projects. I'm not a plumber, but I'm a, self-sufficient kind of guy and well-educated. I can figure this out. And otherwise, without these kinds of tools, I may not have done that, right? Like, I may not have been self-sufficient there. But it can help me, it can search through all the different people who've done these kinds of projects before and actually give me some really good things that I can try, along with maybe some safeguards of, well, if this happens, maybe you should stop and find a professional. These are good questions to ask, right? Like, we still have to think critically about the answers that it's giving, but they can be quite useful if you have the tools to do so. Pets, planning vacations. It's really wonderful at helping me plan vacations that are interesting for me and for my kids. That's great utility for me. So I've been using it in lots of different ways in my personal life as well. Like, I assume many of you are too. And at the same time, kind of taking a pretty big step aside, thinking about my kids in particular, thinking about what the future actually looks like for them is a bit difficult, right? As we just heard, technology has been changing very, very quickly. And like hyper-transformative things could be happening within our lifetimes. And so how do I think about training and equipping and forming my kids into people who will be good people as they grow up, right? And these are big questions. I don't have answers for them, but I think they're questions that I need to keep asking. How do I think about the impact of AI on their formation? We think about smartphones and when kids get access to smartphones. When should kids get access to AI tools for themselves in a self-service basis? I think that's an important question. Joel said, like, get rid of K-12 self-service, digital tools. Like, these are really important questions to ask. So it's not that I'm saying, like, great, use technology everywhere all the time, right? Like, I think that there are good ways to use these things, and I think there are places where it could cause really significant harms, and we need to be careful. How do we teach them to use technology well? How do we teach them about the potential harms of using these kinds of tools, just like we do for social media, right? Like, there are lots of toxic ways that technology has been applied in the past, and this can be one of them as well, as we found. So how do we prepare and teach our kids about these kinds of things? How do we build critical thinking? Like, all the things I was just talking about are expressions of my own critical thinking and using technology tools to apply them in different areas. And so, we had some of these issues brought up before, but we don't want to abdicate that kind of critical thinking in our own personal agency. We want to use tools that empower those things, not the other way around. But it's hard to do that, right? Like, it's hard to do that on the front side when 80% say, like, oh, I have really big problems with potentially doing that, and then do it anyway, right? Like, how do we really think about that? I think it's important. So that's kind of the personal side of things. I hope that gave you a little perspective into me and how I think about things. As I move to my professional life, as I was talking about, I was out of a job, and then I got a new job about a year ago, which is really wonderful. I'm really grateful for that. At the same time, it was in a new industry, banking, something I honestly didn't know very much at all about. and in a new domain for my kind of role, which was working on like back-end databases and platforms. And that's not something that I knew a whole lot about, or especially inside of a huge, giant enterprise company. And so the very first things that I started using GenAI tools about was learning. So there's a lot of documentation, there's a lot of information out there. Well, I can use it to help answer my questions about all the things that I have about this new industry and new domain. So I just hammered that thing, right? Like I'm super curious and I love learning, and that just fed me, right? Like I can ask lots of important and interesting questions, and it can give them to me without any friction. I found that incredibly, again, empowering. I could sort of take this job and start making it my own and start putting myself inside of that perspective in a way that I previously, couldn't. Or might have to go to a bunch of people and take a really lot of time. And not that I didn't do that, right? Like I talked to a lot of people too, or we are incentivized to do that, really, like meet and greets and talking to people in different teams. Like the social side of things is still super important. You can't just go off in a corner somewhere and do your thing, right? Like that's not advisable. But in the time that I had, I could make it really productive because I had these tools. So that was one part. The other interesting part is that I was tasked with managing this like legacy data system that's been around for about 30 years. And in terms of technology cycles, as we just heard about, like that's a really long time. This is very old, and it's a thing that really was locked behind a lot of institutional knowledge of, a small handful of engineers. Not a lot of documentation. We're not very good at documenting our technology systems along the way. And so I was tasked with being, productive at managing and maintaining and, pushing the system forward. It's really hard to do given those kinds of constraints. The things that I've found recently, though, is that these kinds of AI tools break a lot of those constraints. Because it can go in and answer all of my questions about source code and right, how these systems interact and which one is connected with which other one and why that's important and how can a customer called in with this particular problem. Something happened with this piece of data, right, which is like I deal with customer data. How do I find where that broke? It might be in any one of like 10 interconnected systems. That can take weeks to kind of really figure out, and maybe a bunch of teams sitting in a room having like ineffective meetings, which is generally what we experience in corporate life. How do we cut through all of that? Well, these tools can cut through all of that. It can go line by line and point by point and bring me all the way exactly to the answer that I was looking for and cut through all of this extra waste. So it's been, again, extremely empowering to me in my own job for being effective. And that's been really quite wonderful. I honestly felt really frustrated for a long time in this job. And once I got access to AI tools and could start utilizing them for the purposes that I had, it really unlocked my ability to be productive. That said, right, I deal with customer data. And so we also still have to be quite prudent with the kinds of data that we give to these systems. And so, right, like one of the good things about banks is that they're highly regulated, and so you're just not allowed to do a bunch of dangerous stuff, which is awesome. So like, yeah, we can't feed personal information into these systems. That's really good, right? That should be like in policies and regulations and all these things, right? Like that's a good protection for us. Having appropriate protections is a way to make sure that we can continue using these tools that improve our productivity without having the sort of negative harms that they might cause given other circumstances. So just wanted to have that little point there too, right? We're not just running amok here. These are like well thought out, well reasoned, very sort of controlled experiences. All right, let's move to the last one because honestly, I think it's probably the most interesting one. Going back again a little bit, I have a computer science degree, so like I thought I was going to be a developer. Thought I was going to code. Thought I was going to build computer games. That was going to be amazing. But I was terrible at it. Honestly, I love technology, and I'm terrible at coding. I always was. And so I knew that I wanted to work in technology. Like I knew that was a lot of where my passion lived, but I didn't know how. At some point, I learned that there was a kind of job that works like with technologists, but doesn't do the coding, and you still get to like build stuff, and that's what a product manager does. And so like that's what I do today. I went back to school, and like I've become that today, and that's been like really gratifying and cool. The interesting thing too, though, is that because AI is so good at things like coding, somebody like me who has been trained in how to build technology products and what good looks like, maybe I don't always need engineers to like actually build things anymore. Sorry to any engineers in the room. And that's what Fluency Works has become. So my wife and I have a friend who is a longtime educator, and she's been developing this curriculum around math fluency. And as we heard from other folks, the state of education in our world, like it's actually going down in ways that we've never seen before, which is quite interesting. Our friend, though, had this solution that she was building inside of a school, which was building math fluency through like physical classroom routines and training teachers in teaching fluency. But the thing is that she had you have to track these things in order to really make the system work, right? Like you need to know where students are, whether they're progressing or not, how that's working. And so she'd built a bunch of digital tools on her own. It was really hard. It took tons of time. It was hard to maintain, right? It's this manual kinds of process. And so when we started talking, I was like, wow, this is what software is made for, right? We take your one thing, we just make it extremely scalable, and we can build things once, and we can apply it to all sorts of different places, and it's just software is kind of magic. It's just really quite wonderful. Anyway, I was like, this is wild. I think actually that in fact, could actually build the digital layer of your solution that you need in order to make this a real thing and to create a solution that could be delivered into real classrooms. So that's the journey that we're actually on. We have a couple of pilot schools next year, which is pretty cool. This is not just a plug, but this is a thing that's actually really happening because I could use AI tools to build a solution for this teacher who, she didn't have access to coders and a bunch of capital and things to build the thing that she really wanted. But because we got together and I saw that she was quite brilliant and had something that we both thought could, or that we all thought could have a significant impact on turning the tide on math fluency, that's a thing that I got really excited about. And I thought about using these no code or low code tools to kind of build things. And I just wasn't sure of myself. But then one day I just told Beth, I'm just going to try to build it and see how it goes. And then we'll see how far we get. And that was, in March. And now I'm building a real software as a service platform that is legitimately something useful. And in my hopes and dreams, something that has a significant impact on the world. And I think that this probably just wouldn't have existed. Or it might have existed in one school or two schools or something like that. I don't think we would have been able to raise kind of capital or find access to resources. I just don't think that would have happened. But I think it's quite consequential that given that these tools exist and are essentially free, right, extremely low cost, the leverage that I can get as a professional to build things that otherwise wouldn't exist is astonishing. And I don't know how much credence you all might give to this, but for me it's felt like joy. I and my creativity and my experience and expertise has been unleashed in a way that can bring forth solutions that didn't exist before. Like for me, that's about the truest like expression of myself that I can kind of find. And that's like really exciting to me, and I hope that other people are having that experience too. So yeah, it's kind of come back around again in a really curious way, where it's not just that these tools exist and that's cool, but this is helping me become the person who I think I'm supposed to be. And that's a really weird, honestly, it's a little weird to say that, considering especially all of the harms and challenges and other things that have been surrounding this, this issue, right? But I don't think we get just one or the other, right? I think we have to hold all of these perspectives together at the same time and continue to push and ask questions and think about how we can apply not just technology tools to our lives, but the wisdom and learnings that we have from many other areas to understand like how that should actually look. So that's my story. I guess we're having some Q&A.
Okay, I don't want to shortchange this second group of three, but we only have 2 minutes, and I want to protect your time. So does anyone have a question? And you can pose it towards any of them, and we can...
So Jason, and I think your second to last slide that you zipped through, I saw de-skilling, and both you and May had a story that was relevant to that. You with the 5% of the time that you don't get the code you want, you have to debug it yourself. May with the fact that you had to review everything as an expert. So you got that expertise because you spent a lot of time coding and because you did this without AI. So how do you train the next generation who's coming in who has these AI tools to be able to use this in a way that the whole system doesn't fall apart?
It's a very complicated question. I mean, one aspect of it in my mind is like when I learned to program, I didn't learn assembly language. So like someone in the 70s, if they were programming, they would have to do it through assembly. So the nature of, I mean, the key thing is like actually in a funny way with AI, the architectural aspects of software development, like the important things, that's actually even more important because you're moving so much faster and you don't understand what you're doing, right? Because someone else wrote everything. So it's, in a way, like just shifts where those skills need to be. And I was going to talk a little bit about that, right? Like I don't necessarily believe as much in I mean, there will be some job loss. I am worried about entry-level stuff, honestly, because of how the economy is currently kind of oriented. But like longer term, at least my experience with automation and personally, is like it almost always creates more work than it actually, like long-term creates more work than it takes away, right? So I think it'll be more of like a pivoting, which can be very hard, right? Because it's like Hillary Clinton's famous thing about like coal miners in West Virginia should just learn to program, right? Like it's hard to like people like doing that pivot, that's not necessarily clean and going to actually happen. But anyway, I hope that helps a little bit. It's like I think the skills we'll need will change, I guess is the bottom line. Yeah.
Yeah, and
here, just for the sake of the video.
Okay. Given that I work in talent, EQ is very, 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 very important and cannot be replaced by AI, right? So the way that we are doing it now is we're still in the trying to figure it out range and what is going to be scalable and sustainable, right, and repeatable. Personally, for my kids, it's very basic eye contact. Shake someone's hand firmly, ask questions, less statements, ask questions. And how this comes about really, because at the end of the day in talent, I'm trying to read people quickly and accurately and be curious about them and be present, right? I'm trying to create a safe space where they can be themselves so I can make sure they're the right fit for the company. So that's all EQ. So that's how it works personally. It's really thinking about how do you show up well in a conversation? You can do that at home. That's really on you. In terms of our fund, I interview a lot with our young associates, right? and I give them feedback. So I'm doing it with them so they understand what it looks like to talk to somebody twice their age who is a leader, right? These are often young people. And I'm surprised, I'm telling you, there's a lot of breakdown in that, but we're still trying to figure it out. And we're really worried about the pipeline. In my industry, a lot of finance professionals, we're recruiting less and less of them because all the modeling that they did, all the financial engineering that they did, all that Excel work, we can do that in a fraction of the time. But all of the relationship building that happens in finance, all the partnership that happens, all the EQ, we still need people to do that. We still need to recruit for people to do that. It's a tricky thing. So pray for us. How do we make leaders in this age? That's really the hardest thing. Thanks. Watch your stuff as you.
Thanks. It's noon. I'm going to go ahead and call it. But you've now seen some of the brilliant minds who you can ask on Sunday or throughout the week. You're showing me this for a reason to say again the QR code. Oh. Chris Messick developed a list of resources. The QR code takes you to that list of resources. Is that right, Chris? Yes. Okay. So it's a follow-up for all the information we didn't have time to talk about, but a couple things. One, I appreciate that in your presentation you talked about in the church world and in the business world. And so I feel like we are going to have a part 2 conversation, and we're going to get more into some of the theology. What do we do theologically with AI? What are the questions and concerns? What should be shaping our mind? Not just what can it do, but what should we allow it to do because of theological questions. So that will be in part 2. That will happen in early fall. I don't have the exact date yet, but stay tuned. We'll get it ready. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful Saturday.